So a couple of things just want to cover before we get into today's session, and that's next week on Wednesday. If you happen to do any work involving rental properties, we're going to be having a landlord-tenant workshop. That will be Wednesday, 10 o'clock in the morning. We're going to have a couple of attorneys who are experts in that field joining us. It's been an environment in which the game rules of engagement have changed, sometimes daily, weekly. A whole lot of questions and a whole lot of things have been in flux as it relates to managing rental properties. So great opportunity for you to go ahead and get the latest on that, as well as to ask questions of those who are dealing in that world on the legal side of things. So we hope you'll join us for that. If you haven't heard already, Code of Ethics deadline is at the end of this year. Many of our members, about half of our members, have already taken care of their Code of Ethics requirements. So if you are a part of that group, kudos to you. We appreciate you taking care of that coursework, getting your certificate of notification or of completion into Donna. For those who haven't completed it, what are you waiting for? Now is the time. Square that stuff away. Don't wait until it's cold and chilly weather and it's the end of the year crush. Now's the time to do it. If you have not completed that, we are sending direct messages to folks. We'll have some messaging going out today. We have a Code of Ethics Zoom course that will take place later on this month. I think the 21st, can't hold me to that. I think it's the 21st, hosted by our guest instructor, Heather Patron-Shook. It's probably the best way to go ahead and do the Code of Ethics. Another way to do the Code of Ethics is via the NAR website. And if you choose that option, the good thing about that option is you get to do it at your own time. You start on one day and then you have 30 days to complete it from that start point. So you could do 10 minutes here, 20 minutes there, 5 minutes here, whatever it might be. Needless to say, we want you guys to get that done and over with. If you have completed it and you haven't sent your certificate of completion into the GPAR, please do so. That goes to Donna at gpar.org. Just email that into her so we can get you off of the list. And then you won't be getting any more of those emails from us that will be going out later on today. So here we are today, agreement of sale. Glad to see so many people with us today. This is one of our most popular workshops. And our instructor is Trent Pettus. So one of the ground rules for Trent is this. He likes to see people's faces. So we don't care if you haven't done your makeup. We don't care if you have a receding hairline and it looks terrible on your Zoom camera. Just show your face. Trent loves it. And the other part of this is Trent loves for you guys to jump in. It's interactive. So if you have a question, a thought, something that you've come across during the course of your professional experience, just spell it out. Contribute to it, because it's an opportunity for all of us to learn. And the cool part about our agreement of sale workshops that we've done with Trent is that we have the seasoned, grizzled veteran who has seen it all to the brand new agent who doesn't know what they don't know yet, right? So when we have that kind of interplay, it helps out tremendously to hear these different things, because sometimes if you've been around the block 1,000 times, there's certain things that we kind of forget or we just haven't seen in a long while. So that interaction really helps to make this a really great experience. Then one last thing before I hand it over to Trent. In the chat, I put a link that has a folder to all the documents that we'll be referencing during the course of the workshop today. And also too, I dropped in the files themselves into the chat as well. So you get it both ways. And hopefully you're able to connect with those documents as we start to roll through today's presentation. So here we have Trent Pettus. He's a key contributor to GPAR. He was one of our MVPs a couple of years ago. Fantastic instructor. And Trent, the floor is yours.
Morning, everyone. Thank you, Matt. Good morning. Good morning. I'd just like to know, is there a way that you all can show me, and I really would like if you all would put videos up. I know some of you can't, but it does help because I'm sitting here looking at a blank screen. And I have you on my big screen TV so I can see faces. But I do want to question. So can you let me know if they're new agents? So I'd like to know who I'm talking to so I can know how to do this. Is anybody here not ever written up an agreement of sale yet? Just kind of raise your hand.
I have it.
All right. And of course, some of you are experienced. I see some of you, I know some of you. Most of you, what would you say? You've been in a business. How many of you have been in a business between 1 and 3 years? Like, just raise your hand. How many of you have been in business more than 10 years? More than 20 years? Anybody in business more than 20, 30 years? All right. Well, welcome. I'm actually down in Florida. I opened an office in Florida a few months, well, last year. So I come back and forth to Florida. I bought a place here a few years ago. I figured I may as well get a broker's license in Florida, which is a smart, good thing to do because I'm doing a lot of business down here. So I just go back and forth, and I'm loving it here. But so everything is good. But I also love this business. I love this business, and that's why I love doing these classes. Because let me just say this: I think I've done okay in this business. I love this business, and I've always believed that we should do this business with integrity. That's why I call my business Integrity Real Estate Services. That's how I live my life, and that's how I conduct business. I don't like cutting corners. People know me, know that I believe you do this thing the right way, and you become a better agent, just a better person. And I see us all as real estate professionals. I see this as a profession. If you don't view it as a profession, maybe you should not be doing it. And professionals they should know their craft. And that's one of the reasons why these classes are important. If you are a professional and you're using documents that you don't understand or you're not as familiar with, then you're probably not going to be as good as you could. I found during my 20-some years in this business that the more I know about these documents, the better agent I become or have become, because first of all, you can do a better job with your client. Second thing, you can do a better job when you're talking to other agents. And as I was just sitting down, it just occurred to me. I remember years ago, an agent said to me, I had a mortgage commitment date that I missed. My mortgage commitment was not in. And she called and she said, Trent, if you don't get this mortgage commitment in by the end of the day, the seller's going to keep your buyer's $10,000 deposit. And I said to her, well, you know, you can't do that. And she says, yes, I do. Yes, I can. And she says, I said, how long have you been in the business? She said, 25 years. And I said, well, let me show you an agreement sale where it says just the opposite of what you just said to me. We looked at the agreement sale and she says to me, do you know, Trent, I never knew that was in there. I tell agents all the time that if they don't get a mortgage commitment to me by a certain date, my seller, this is how I intimidate them or get them to move quicker. And then I actually believe that I could keep their earnest money deposit when in fact I can. And I'll show you that in the agreement sales we go on. I tell you that story because it just makes you a smarter, more efficient, more effective, better professional if you know what's in these documents. And then some seasoned agent can't intimidate you to believe in that the seller can keep your buyer's deposit money when in fact they can't. That's one of the reasons I do these classes, and I just want to make agents better because this is a profession that I love. And it's a profession that we all should take pride in because we are professionals. All right. So having said that, Matt said, I do want you to interrupt me. If you have questions, I don't want to talk for 3 hours. All right. I want to interrupt. There are agents with experiences. You have questions, you have comments. Let's make this interactive. Everybody kind of knows that's how I function, but we'll get started. Any questions or comments before we even start? All right. Let's just start with the first document that you need When you meet with a client, well, it would be a customer before a customer, what document do you need to have that client or customer sign when you first meet with them? Anybody?
Consumer
Nobody?
notice.
All right, consumer notice. When you give a consumer notice, first of all, and the last time I did a seminar, a few experienced agents actually called me back and said, Trent, I didn't realize that you had to keep the consumer notice for 6 months if it doesn't become a client. I thought kind of everybody knew that. If you don't know that, the consumer notice, if that person does not become a client, you, the agent, must keep that consumer notice for at least 6 months. Obviously, if they become a client, then your broker would keep, there would be a file, and that broker has to keep that file for at least 3 years. But you, the agent, must keep, and you're only required to keep the signature page. You know, it's a 2-page document. May as well keep the whole document, but you are required to show proof that you had this person sign a consumer notice at the initial interview. What happens if if someone calls your office and you don't have a consumer notice in front of you? How do you get it to them? Well, there is, and I believe Donna put put the oral consumer notice. Let's back up. When do you need a consumer notice? You need a consumer notice when you are having a substantive conversation about real estate. Not if someone calls you and asks you the price of a property. Not if someone calls and asks you the zone and classification. You need a consumer notice when, and if you look at the consumer notice, it actually says, in an effort to enable consumers of real estate services to make informed decisions about the business relationship choices that they have, because this is what it is. You're going to enter into a business relationship with a potential client. Then it says the Real Estate License and Registration Act requires that consumers be provided with this notice at the initial interview. The initial interview is defined as the first contact between the agent and the consumer where a substantive conversation about real estate occurs. What's substantive? Not the price of the property. Substantive would be, hey, I'm calling you. I have a pre-approval from Wells Fargo for $300. I want to be out of my apartment by the end of September. I want to be in a house by November. I've got $50,000 saved. That's a substantive conversation about real estate. If there's something that you can get offline, if there's some public information, it's not substantive because it's public. But if I start giving you private information and start talking to you about my motives or my goals, you need to stop that person and say, let me get you the consumer notice. If you can't get to them, get it to them by fax or text or email, then you have to read verbatim the oral consumer notice, which I think you have provided. And just make sure you keep that for at least 6 months. All right, any questions, comments? I really do like people to talk to me, but that's all right. Let's go to the agreement sale. All right, let's start with agreement sale. The top, buyers, sellers. You put in the buyer's name, seller's name. Here is one thing, and I went to the gym this morning. I'm driving back, and I'm thinking, I remember, and as I'm driving, this thought just came into my mind. Make sure you don't misspell the seller's name. If you're writing up a contract, I've seen this, and any agent who's been in business for a while will tell you how many times you get a contract with the seller's name misspelled. I remember there are 2 times in my career where sellers, well, I'll tell you one in particular. Sellers hate it when people misspell their name. The buyer sends me a contract, the highest offer, by the way, with the seller's name misspelled. And it wasn't a complicated name. It wasn't some hard name. It was just the seller. The agent was just being sloppy. So I say to the agent, hey, would you kindly correct the seller's name? Her name is spelled this way. He says to me, well, Trent, just present it, have her cross it out, and it's okay. I said, well, that's going to be a problem, but I'll do that because I have to present the offer. I present it to the seller. What does the seller say? This person signed, misspelled my name. I said, yes, I told the agent. She says, well, we have at this point like 3 offers. This offer is the best offer. You know what she said? Go back and see if you can get more from the other 2, but go back and tell this agent, I will not take any offers from him. I called this agent back and I said, well, he says, well, do you have a counter for me? I said, yes, the counter is don't submit any more offers. The seller's not going to entertain any offers from you. Seller ended up taking $10,000 less from another buyer because she refused to take an offer from a person who misspelled her name. They don't teach you that on HGTV. That's real life stuff. Don't be a sloppy agent. Don't misspell seller's name. Take your time with these contracts. This is not a rush. 2 times that's happened to me in my life where a seller outright rejected contracts because the name was misspelled. Take your time with these contracts. This is not a rush. All right. Make sure the buyer's name, seller's name, the full name. If it's a junior, put middle initials. I think you should put a full name. If it's John V. Smith Jr., put this whole name. Don't just put John Smith. Put their full legal name in there. But mailing addresses, I refuse to put my buyer's mailing address. People may disagree with me. And I'll tell you why, because years ago, I had a seller who I submitted an offer. The agent called me and questioned me about where my buyer lived. And it was clear and did not take said to me that we had the strongest offer, but kept asking me about her address and said, that's a rough neighborhood. What did she do again? Let me look at, you sure her job is legit? These are questions this agent was asking me. And I'm like, sir, what does this have to do with it? We did not get that off. We did not get our offer accepted. I followed it through. When it closed, our offer was maybe about 8,000 higher than the other offers. So after that point, I refused to put buyers' addresses because I never thought that some people will look at the address of a buyer and decide to not give them a property. I never would have thought that. That's the one thing I love about this business, because every day you learn something new. All right, look at the property address. Obviously, you're gonna put the street address, the municipality. If we're talking Philadelphia, it's Philadelphia. School district, Philadelphia, no problem. Here is when it becomes a problem. Make sure I go by the tax ID number. Make sure you put the tax ID number, because that's how you identify this property. Don't just leave that blank. Make sure you put the tax ID number of that property. You get that out of public records. But the school district is an issue when you are what? When you're selling properties outside of Philadelphia. If you are selling in Philadelphia, outside of Philadelphia, many of my clients who bought houses in the suburbs bought houses. Why? Because they want to send their children to a particular school. I remember being at a settlement back in Abington years ago, and I heard all this commotion. And what was happening, the agent in MLS put that the elementary school, which at that time was a blue ribbon elementary school. I think they have 2 elementary schools in Abington. And the other one was not a blue ribbon. Well, this woman back maybe 15 years ago buys a $500,000 property in Abington for the sole purpose of putting her 2 young boys in this blue ribbon elementary school. The agent put the wrong elementary school. So they had settlement, signing documents, and she mentioned something about when she's going to enroll her kids. The seller says, well, no, your children don't go to this school, they go to the other. And she says, oh, no, that's not true. She said, yes, it is. Agent put the wrong information. The seller's agent did. The buyer's agent didn't bother to check. I guess maybe just, I don't know. And so here is a woman sitting at settlement, and she walks out and sues her agent and the seller's agent. No one gets a commission. The seller sues her agent also. And just because nobody bothered to check to see if the elementary school was the correct elementary school. Don't make those kind of sloppy mistakes. All you have to do is go on the internet, on the website. But I would say, and some experienced agent will say this, don't put it on you. Put that liability on them. I would say in that situation, I will check, but I'll say to my buyer, I want you to check to make sure this is the right elementary school. We'll both check. But that way, if your information is wrong, you can't come back and fault me. But I'm going to check. At least I'm going to do that much due diligence, because I know my buyer is moving out to Abington for the sole purpose of putting her children in a certain elementary school. How do you, as an agent, not at least check that information? Any comments?
Hey, Trent, we got a question in the chat. This is going back a couple of minutes.
Yes.
What if the seller's name on public record is different from the name on seller's disclosure? For example, if a divorce is in progress, a woman is using her maiden name now.
Then you would call the agent. You would ask the agent what name should I use? If there's a different, and that's a good question. If the name on public records is different, well, first of all, I'm going to use a name that's an MLS. Whatever the agent puts, if the agent says the owner is John Smith, but MLS says something else, I'm going to go with the agent. Maybe the person who was originally on the property died and left the property. I don't know. But if that's the case, call the agent. Say, hey, who's the owner? I'm writing up a contract. Who's the owner of this property? Don't just assume you know the owner. And don't do this. I don't know if anybody that's been around a while. You used to see where it had the owner and MLS and said could be you. Did anybody ever see that? It used to drive me nuts. Could be you. They didn't give you the owner's name. It just said could be you. And I'm like, what does that mean? How do I write up a contract if I don't know who the owner is? Could be you. And so don't do things like that. Put the owner's name. All right, go to the buyer relationship with the PA licensed broker. Clearly, if you represent the buyer, you put your company name. You should know the license number, the address. You know all that. And the broker, if you're the buyer's agent, obviously you check that box, buyer agent. If you represent both the buyer and the seller, you're a dual agent, and you would need to check that. Remember, if you're a dual agent, you have to have written consent from both the buyer and the seller. Anytime you represent both parties in the same transaction, you should have written, well, that's mandated that you have written consent. All right. I mean, I don't know if offices do it, but you should probably put it in his contract. You should have a separate form, but you have to have written consent. All right, that the buyer and the seller have agreed to allow you to represent both parties, because not everybody wants you to represent both parties. On the other side of that is your information, licensee or the salesperson. If there's more than one salesperson, put both names, put both information, put all the information. If there's a co-listing agent, your name should go, both names ought to go on this contract. Put the license number, the phone numbers, emails, put this stuff so that the other agent knows how to contact you. Don't leave that blank. I get contracts where there's no email, there's no cell phone, they just have the office number. If you're doing real estate, you ought to have a cell phone where another agent can contact you. All right. If you don't have a way that I can contact you, you ought to get one. You should get a way. And then the licensee, you would check if you're the buyer's agent. Obviously, everybody in your office represents a buyer, just like if you're the seller's agent, everybody in your office represents a seller. If you are a buyer agent with designated agency, some offices practice designated agency. You would have to ask your broker if you're one of those offices. If you are an office that practices designated agency, then you would just check that box. Don't assume that you know if the other office, the buyer for the office or the broker, the seller's agent is a designated agent or not. You have to ask, or just leave it blank, because I don't know. When I go down to if I'm representing the buyer, and if you look at the second box, the seller relationship, I don't know whether it's a seller's agent or seller's agent with designated agency unless I ask. Don't assume it's just a seller's agent. Leave it blank if you don't know, and let that seller's agent check the box. All right, makes sense? If you look at go to the second page, this agreement, the date of this agreement. Make sure the date should be the date that the first part, the buyer's gonna be the first party to sign. The date that your buyer signs a contract. It avoids confusion, so you know exactly the date, because dates become so important. I would put the date that the buyer signs a contract. So if the buyer is going to come to the office tomorrow and sign, and you prepared the contract today, don't put today's date. Put tomorrow's date. All right, but don't put the date that the buyer. That way, the date that the contract is dated the same date the buyer signs, which is dated the same date that you should send it over to the seller's agent. So you're not having all these different dates. It's dated this date. The buyer signs this date, and you send it to the seller another date. It gets confusing as to what the execution date or what these dates. Just use one date. The date that the buyer signs is it should be the date of this contract. Same date you send it over to the agent. All right. Purchase price. Obviously, you would just write in the purchase price. If there is a deposit, every time I ask this question, do you have to have a earnest money deposit and an agreement sale? Is that required?
Yeah.
Why do you say yes? Who's the person just said yes? Why do you say yes? Someone said yes. All right. Does anybody else want to answer? Does anybody else know? Is it required to have a earnest money deposit in a contract and in an agreement sale?
No, it's a good faith deposit.
It's just a good faith deposit. Absolutely. It's not required. Because, and most people think, when I ask this question, they think contracts must have consideration. In order to have one of the essential elements of a contract is that it must have consideration, which is something of value. And in our business, is usually money. But that something of value in this agreement sale is the purchase price. That's the consideration, not the earnest money deposit. So yeah, should you take a property off the market with no earnest money deposit? Probably not. But once I had a mother who was selling her daughter, and she said, don't require my daughter to put an earnest money deposit. So once I did write up a contract with no earnest money deposit, but typically you're not going to have your seller take his or her property off the market with no earnest money deposit. All right. Make sure that that money is in on time, and you'll see this. And I know I've done it. We've all done it. An agent calls you, check's supposed to be in by today. Today is what, the 10th? And agent says, "Hey, Trent, I'm out, but I'll get to you. I'm at the shore. Is there any way I can just drop the check off in the morning?" I say, okay, which I shouldn't. I know better. I wouldn't now. I did 20 years ago. And then what happens? The buyer changes his or her mind overnight, says, "I don't want to buy that property. And by the way, agent, don't give them my earnest money deposit." Now I'm in trouble because I should have in my hand an earnest money deposit, which now I don't have. I didn't get permission from the seller to get an extension. So don't make that mistake. Make sure if the earnest money deposit is not in by the date that's specified in this contract or this agreement sale, make sure then that you tell the seller. Let the seller decide what's going to happen. You say, "Hey, seller, the earnest money deposit did not come in. What do you want me to do?" Seller could say, give them an extension of 2 days or put it back on the market. I'm not going to accept it. I'm not going to give them extension. You don't make that decision. Let your client make that decision. All right. Maybe the seller says, "Hey, I'm glad that happened because I have a coworker who wants to pay $20,000 more for the property." Don't ever make decisions for your buyer or your seller. Let them make decisions. Give them the facts and you let them make the decision so you don't have to worry about any kind of consequences that comes from those decisions. B, when you are paragraph 2B, if you are closing within 30 days, make sure a contract says you will not take a personal check. Remember, if your settlement, especially if you're dealing with investors and they're going to close 30 days before, make sure you don't get personal checks, you take certified checks. It says here on 2B, all funds paid by buyer, including cashier's check or wire funds. All funds paid by buyer within 30 days of settlement will be by cashier's check or wire funds, but not by personal checks. So don't take personal checks if settlement is going to be less than 30 days. And if you look at C, the broker, it says deposits are going to be held by the broker for the seller. That's how we normally do it. But and keep in mind, anytime a broker, you're the buyer's agent, and that client gives you a check made payable to the broker for the seller, you must have them sign a deposit money notice. That is required, because if a buyer is giving you money that's going to be turned over to the cooperating broker, then you must have a deposit money notice, because that buyer has a right to know where his or her money, who's holding his or her escrow money. So that if there are any disputes, because we all have seen her buyers say, "Hey, I want my money back," and say, "Well, I'm not holding the money." The seller's agent is holding the money. Make sure you have a deposit money notice. If you're not holding, and now I'm seeing more and more offices are not holding deposits, make sure if an attorney's holding it or a title company, you would put it here. Look at that C where it says deposits, regardless of the form of payment, will be made in US dollars or broker for seller unless otherwise stated here. And you would put the attorney's name, and I would put the law firm, or you would put the name of the title company. But keep in mind that if an attorney or title company holds escrow, they're not, and it says here, look at that line that says only real estate brokers are required to hold deposits in accordance with the rules and regulations of the State Real Estate Commission. So if a lawyer or a title company is holding that deposit, they are not bound by the rules and regulations of the State Real Estate Commission. So you need to make sure you know what happens in the event of a dispute. Who gets the money? There should be an escrow agreement, or but you need to make sure that an attorney or that title company that decide, hey, they decide who they think the buyer's right or the seller's right, and they give that money away. Brokers can't do that. I don't like attorneys and title companies holding deposits. If my office didn't want to hold it, I would ask the other office to hold it. And we see that happening more and more. It's better to have a broker hold it than a title company or an attorney, in my opinion. All right, any questions? Seller assist, paragraph 3, seller assist. Make sure you know how much assist the buyer can get. You don't assume that the buyer can get 6% or 3%. Make sure you know. I have seen this happen time and time again over the years, where an agent will ask for 6%, seller agrees to it, agent comes back and says, oh, by the way, the lender will only allow 4% seller assist. And I said, well, that's what we'll give you. They said, well, then give us, since we'll reduce the price, or you can give me a warranty, or you can put a new roof. And I said, we're not doing anything. And let me tell you why I always say that. Take a look at what this says at paragraph 3. That second line says, seller is only obligated to pay up to the amount or percentage which is approved by the mortgage lender. The seller is not required to do anything. If we agree to 6%, and the mortgage lender says this buyer can only get 4%, then the seller is only obligated to get 4%. I'm not giving anything else. So don't make that mistake if you're a buyer's agent. We know if it's an FHA loan that the buyer can get up to 6%. We all know that. Just make sure you always know that. So you never have a problem. 6% is a maximum seller assist you can get if it's an FHA loan. Conventional could be, it depends on how much money you put down. So you don't know how much seller assist you can get. If it's a conventional loan, you better make sure you ask the lender, because it could be anywhere from 2 to 6%. So don't assume, have the lender tell you what the maximum seller assist. And with a VA loan, it's usually around 4%, but then the seller can pay some of that closing costs. So just make sure you know what the seller assist is, the maximum, before you submit the contract. You don't want a seller to accept it and then have to come back and say, oh, by the way, I need to change that. Any questions or comments? All right, paragraph 4, settlement and possession. Just say the settlement has to occur in the county where the property is located, or in an adjacent county. So if you're about to close, obviously the buyer selects the title company and picks where the settlement will be. But settlement cannot be in Harrisburg unless you both agree. But the settlement has to occur if the property is in Philadelphia, it has to occur in Philadelphia County, or one of the counties that touches Philadelphia. Bucks County, Delaware County, Montgomery County, Bucks County, any county that is adjacent to Philadelphia County. You don't have to get permission from the seller's agent to hold the settlement there. But I can't have the settlement in Cherry Hill unless we both agree. All right.
Trent, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So when we're talking, to go back up to the seller's assist, when and maybe you'll talk about this later, but when we're negotiating with like inspections, does that count towards?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, yes, I know what you're asking. Let's say you got 6% seller assist, and then the seller says you negotiate, there was a bad roof, and the seller's willing to give a repair credit to the buyer. Well, that's considered assist. So you could, in that situation, what you would do, and the best way to handle something like that, because the lender's not going to let the buyer get more than 6%. So a credit from the seller is still considered assist. But what you would do in that situation, let's say seller's already given you 6%, which is a limit. and the roof is bad, the seller says, I'm willing to pay for the roof, it's $2,000. Well, what the seller could do, or what I would have them do, is have the seller write the check at settlement, have the title company write the check to the roofer. And then you simply give the check to the buyer at settlement. And when the roof is done, the buyer gives the check to the roofer. It's already, because remember, you're gonna have a proposal. So, and the check will be made payable to the roofer. You just pay the roofer. That way the money is coming out, the funds are coming out of seller's proceeds, and it's not a credit to the seller, I mean to the buyer, but it still benefits the buyer, but the seller will be paying it. That's how I would handle that. That answer your question?
Yes.
All right, any other questions, comments? All right, I'll go down to just 4F, transfer taxes. Obviously, I split in this contract, but everything in the contract is negotiable. If you look at 4F, it says payment of transfer taxes will be divided equally between the buyer and the seller. If you're selling REOs or bank-owned properties, a lot of times banks will not pay any transfer taxes. So let's be aware of that. Oftentimes they will ask, they will have the buyer pay all transfer taxes. Transfer taxes in the city of Philadelphia, well, the total transfer taxes in the city of Philadelphia, which includes the portion that goes to the state, is 4.278%. 4.278%. If we split it, then both buyer and seller will each pay 2.14%. So the total is 4.278%. And if we split it, buyer pays 2.14%, seller pays 2.14%. All right. And G, here's something that a lot of new agents, and I still see this in contracts. G says possession is to be delivered by deed, existing keys, and physical possession to a vacant property free of debris with all structures broom clean at the time and at date and time of settlement. You don't have to put an addendum or put in under additional comments that the seller needs to give you a property with all personal items removed. I see some different language in there. It says right here that possessions be delivered to a vacant property free of debris with all structures broom clean. You have to give the buyer a property that's broom swept clean. You don't need to put that in the contract. Lots of times I see that in the contract is already here. You don't have to put there. Sellers cannot deliver a property to a buyer that has all their old furniture, has a beat up sofa in the living room and expect you to move it. No, they have to remove all their personal items out of the property, and it should be removed before settlement. No, it should be removed when you do your pre-settlement walkthrough. All right. H talks about if there's a lease. Another thing that I see often, if you deal with a lease, make sure if the property is tenant occupied. First of all, you see the box down there. There's a tenant occupied addendum that you should be using. You can get that off a zip form. It says that you are required to turn over all the leases. If I'm buying the property, I have a right to see leases. I should know. I should get rent rolls. I should know if the tenants are paying the rent. I should know if they're late. I should have a history. I should know how much security deposit they put down. I should know who's living there. I know when the leases expire. So, and if your client does not have written leases, then you make them write out. What we call a memorandum of lease. Just transfer it. Just have them write it out. In other words, if they say, your seller says, I don't have leases. And you say, okay, the tenant on the first floor pays what? $800. How much they put down as security deposit? $800. When's the lease expired? It's a month to month. All right. So tell me about how this year, when they pay that rent on time. Oh, they paid it on time. The first, they were late only in March, but then they paid a late fee. What is a late fee? So have them write all that out. And then have them sign it. And then I would have the buyer sign it. So now the buyer knows exactly what the terms of that lease are because there's no written lease. And I get a lot of, so just do that to protect yourself. So your buyer doesn't come back later and says, wait a minute, they told me they didn't give a security deposit. And make sure, by the way, you get that at closing too. If there's a security deposit, remember that security deposit needs to be turned over to your client. So your client can then put that security deposit in his or her escrow account. Also, all right. So and make sure you tell sellers slash landlords, because sometimes they don't realize this. Where is it? Go back to H. It says that if the seller is identified and right in the property subject to a lease, possession is delivered by deed, existing keys and assignment of existing leases for the property together with security deposit and interest. Seller, this is where I make sure I point out to sellers when I'm dealing with multifamily house, tenant occupied property. Seller will not enter into any new leases, nor extend existing leases for the property without the written consent of the buyer. Let the seller know that he or she cannot enter into a new lease unless the buyer agrees, because maybe the buyer wants to move into that unit. So I'm on the verge of buying this property end of July, and now you give this first floor tenant a 1-year lease. Well, it may be a problem if I'm buying I have an FHA loan and I'm required to occupy that property, use that property as my primary residence, and I'm required to move into that property in 60 days. I may have a problem if no unit is available. I'm buying a property that you just extended a lease and I have an FHA loan, you could have a problem there. Any questions, comments? Paragraph 5, time is of the essence. What does time is of the essence mean? I'm sure you all remember it from real estate fundamentals and practice. Time is of the essence means what? That you must adhere to all the dates in this contract, otherwise you may be in default. Whatever dates are here must be adhered to. You can't arbitrarily change any date. The only way dates in this contract can be changed would be if you both agree, if both parties agree to the change. All right, so you can't, if the settlement date is the end of July, then you can't decide that doesn't work with you. So you want to do August 2nd. Well, as long as the seller agrees, but if the seller doesn't agree, you will be in breach of the contract if you don't show up on the 31st and could possibly lose your earnest money deposit. Also, when you put in the settlement date, and I've seen this, I'm sure many of you have seen this, they put down, I even had one that put like the 4th of July. Now, what title company is open on the 4th of July? And this year it happened to be on a Sunday. So don't put December 25th. All right. Don't just count 30 days or 45 days and it falls on January 1st. It falls on Labor Day. It falls on, make sure it is not a weekend. Make sure it's not a holiday. All right. Just again, that's just, I call it just sloppy stuff. We don't do sloppy stuff, all right? We are professionals. We take our time and we do these things right. All right, execution date, 5C, paragraph 5C. What is an execution date? Because you need to know the execution date. That date is important. The execution date is a date that the last person signed this agreement that makes it a contract. It's just an offer when the buyer submits it. It becomes a contract when the seller signs it. That is your execution date. So if the seller signs this today, July 10th, the execution date is July 10th. Why is that important? Because all the dates in this contract are counted from the execution date. You don't count the day of the execution date, that you count the following day. In other words, if the seller signs this agreement today, then the execution date, you would start counting tomorrow, the 11th. So if you have 10 days to do a home inspection and the seller signs today, the 10th is your execution date, you start counting 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Don't count the day that it was signed. So you want to make sure, because I remember an agent who miscounted the days. I don't remember how he did it, but he went on a vacation. I know he went to Brazil. And he called me, I kept saying, when are these people going to do the home inspection? Well, on the day it was supposed to be done, the last day, he calls me and says, hey, I'm on my way back. I don't know where he was, on an airport, and said, we're going to do the home inspection tomorrow. And I said, well, no, you have until today. And he said, well, I told you I was going to Brazil. I said, well, that's nice. Did you take the home inspector with you? You still have to do the home inspection by a certain date. Again, time is of the essence. it doesn't matter that you chose to go to Brazil. Now you can do the home inspection, I said, but the seller's making no repairs. And here's another sad situation. And when I don't like sellers to do repairs until they ask. I never like sellers to put in a new roof, even if the roof is bad. Let the buyer ask. Maybe the buyer is a roofer. Maybe the buyer will do the roof him or herself. Don't want you to do the roof, rather you do something else. I would just let you ask me before you do it. I'm not going to just do it. But anyhow, the seller, the heater in this house was old and it did not work. The seller was, and the roof, by the way, she was going to replace the roof and the heater. And she had estimates for like $25,000 for the two. She was willing to do it. I said, let's just wait until they ask and we'll do it, or we'll give them credit. She said, so when this agent who was coming back from Brazil had to waive that contingency, that home inspection contingency, because he didn't do it on time, we were willing to put $25,000 out for the roof and the heater, and yet we didn't have to do anything. So I don't know how you explain to your buyer that the roof, and they did the home inspection, roof was bad, and it was a big house, so the roof was expensive. The heater was bad. You know what they asked for? They said, well, can you put a new heater and a new roof? We said no. And if you want to back out, you can, and you just forfeit your $30,000 deposit. They moved forward without the heater, without the roof. I don't know how he explained that one to his seller. To his buyer. All you need to know is you need to know the dates in these contracts. You need to know your dates. All right.
Hey.
Don't.
Yeah. Hey, Trent,
Hey,
got a
Trent.
question here.
Oh, sorry, Matt.
Okay, I'll do this one real quick because I know Coy threw this into the chat a little while ago, and then I'll give up the floor. So Coy has a question. He's asking, is the PAR agreement assignable?
Yes. Actually, and I'll show you. Go to page, is on page, paragraph 21, Coy. 21, it says, this agreement is binding upon the parties, their heirs, personal representatives, guardians, and successors, and to the extent assignable on the assigns of the parties thereto. Buyer will not, now here's what the key is, buyer will not transfer or sign this agreement without the written consent of the seller unless otherwise stated in the agreement. It says, so you have, and then it says that assignment of this agreement may result in additional transfer tax, because the Pennsylvania Department of Revenue sometimes views an assignment as a separate agreement. And therefore you may, and that's why you probably need to talk to an attorney or CPA, because you may have to pay transfer taxes on both transactions. So that, because I do know that the Department of Revenue views, and some of these they view as, depends on how they're written, they view them as two separate contracts. So yes, if you're going to sign this agreement to sell, you need to have written consent from the seller. Otherwise, you can't assign it.
All right, one other question here in the chat, Trent, and that is going back to the seller's name. What about in an estate when the owner is deceased?
Then you should just put the estate of John V. Smith. If it's an estate, the seller's name should be the estate of John Smith. And then, of course, whoever the executor or the administrator is would sign off. But that's how you would do it. And that's, yeah, just put the estate of that person. And if you're the seller's agent, put in something in MLS, that's how you should put it, just the estate of that person. That way I know that person died. So if I look in public records and see Mary Washington is the owner, but then I see in MLS it says the estate of John Smith, I know that Mary Washington died. And now this person, this John Smith, Mary Washington died, and maybe, well, let me just say, that's probably a bad example, scratch that. Just put the estate of, if the person has died. I should have said the state of Mary Washington, but go on.
And then I cut someone off. Who was the kind person that I cut off?
I love Trent. It was me. It was me, Matt. Good morning, everybody. Trent, you always make class. You're fine. Trent, you are the bomb. You always make class so interesting. You're very, very funny. I love it.
Thank you.
You're
Do you
so
need any
welcome.
money or anything?
What'd you say?
Do you need money or anything?
No, but I will be calling you now that you've opened your office in Florida. But I do have a question because I've been getting a lot of pushback from other agents about that execution date. Once my
About the
buyer,
what? I didn't hear you.
yep, about the execution date.
Okay.
So it's like once my buyer signs, I've had a lot of listing agents who will then send the agreement of sale back days after. And so then I'm like, well, you know, upon you just now getting this to me with this date stamped today, we actually start today, you know, the very next day.
Now, I would disagree with that. Here's
Okay, that's
why.
what I was about to ask you. Is that
Yeah.
right, wrong?
I would say you're wrong, but I think they're wrong. Here's what I would say. The
Okay.
execution date is the execution date. You can't
Okay.
change the execution date. If the seller signed this agreement today,
Mm-hmm.
today is the execution date and the days start counting tomorrow. But the seller's agent has an obligation to give you that contract immediately. We
Right.
as agents, licensees ought to turn over. Once a seller signs a contract, it should be sent to you immediately. Here's what I would do in that situation. If
Okay.
the seller executed today, I get it back 3 days from now. Then I say, wait a minute, we're going to extend the period of time that my buyer has to conduct inspections.
Oh, inspection.
Right, because remember,
okay.
if the
So-
execution date, if you get it back 3 days after the execution date, you have cut off some of the days that the buyer has to conduct a home inspection. So I would say to the agent, because you got this back to me 3 days late, I want to do an addendum that extends the time that my buyer has to do all his or her inspections.
What about the loan commitment? What about settlement as
I would
well?
set
Would that also?
anything you need to
That's
push
what I
back,
thought.
I would push back.
That's what I do. Okay. I don't
Absolutely.
know if I said it wrong, but that's exactly what I do.
And that's
because
exactly what I would do. That's what you
That's what
should
I've been
do.
running into. And it's just kind of like they've been taking their time getting it
It
back.
makes-
And I'm like,
It makes no sense for a seller's agent not to turn over, once it's signed, that should be in your email ASAP.
Right.
As soon as I get it back from the seller, first thing I do is send it to you. There should be no time. There should
Right.
be, I got it from the seller, I send it to
Boom.
you
Yep.
within seconds. It should
Got
not
it.
be days before you know that the seller returned that. But keep this in mind also, just throw
Okay.
this out. If the seller, let's say your buyer decided that he wanted to change his mind. The seller's already signed it, but the agent didn't give it back to you. Well, the buyer could still get out of that contract because he or she doesn't even know it's been signed.
right.
They don't have a contract because you holding on to it. You may create some legal problems for your seller by not turning that thing over immediately. It makes no
Reason.
sense. There's never a reason why
Right.
you don't have a contract back to that
Yeah.
buyer immediately,
Right.
period. And that agent, whoever that agent, you should say shame on you.
I have. It's several. But it seems to be
send
a
them a
trend
group
these
email.
days.
Send them a group email and say, shame on you.
Trent, this is Sue asking.
Thanks, Trent.
You're
Okay.
welcome. Hi,
A quick
Sue.
Hi, so you would never just update the execution date and have all parties initial it if it was 3 days late?
You could do that. I mean, you
Okay.
could do that. I mean, that's a different, right. That's another way you could do that. Absolutely. I agree. You could do it that way. I've never had it happen. I've never had a agent send me a contract days late, but I would either have them re-execute it. So we have a new execution date and thank you, Sue, but actually that may be an easier way to do it, Sue.
That's what
why
I
love to hear
generally
from other
do.
people.
Yeah.
That may be an easier way to do it.
CTA, Sue, that's exactly what I do because it's becoming a trend lately and it's very frustrating. And so when that does happen to me, I instantly send a CTA because dates are very important and they're here
Right.
for a reason.
I actually
So,
think, and
and
I
I put that in
agree,
the
Sue.
email.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Sue. I
Yeah.
agree with, I would do it Sue's way. See, I
Yeah.
would do it Sue's way. All right.
Excuse me.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Bruce Benjamin, my first class with you. So thank you for being here. It's great. I have a big issue with this as well. See, I think it's missing the word acceptance by all party or that phrase because, you just kind of contradicted yourself in saying that, the execution date, whenever it's signed, that's the date and it's up to the agent. And then you said, well, if the agent doesn't get to you, you don't really have a contract. But this is basically saying, once everyone
Well,
signed
no,
it,
that's not what I.
we have, well, just once.
That's not what I said. That's not what I
Okay, so,
said.
but once everyone signed it, how does the buyer know that the seller signed it? Suppose
The
it's
only way the
a,
buyer would know is if you give it to the buyer. And if you don't give it to the buyer does not have a contract. You have to deliver that contract to a buyer to know that there was a contract signed. What I was saying is that there are implications. If your buyer decided, I'm backing out before you give me it's been executed, 2 days later, you send me a contract, buyer says, I don't want it now. Before you submit it, give it to me, I back out. You could have some issues there. But I was saying the execution date is the execution date, period. Unless, as Sue said, you change the execution date, you could agree that we're going to re-sign this contract. But without getting into details, just do this. Send over a contract when your seller signs it, period, and you don't have a problem. And if you're getting it late, you should tell the buyer, you should tell the seller, I want to re-execute the contract.
and what right, but what right do you have to do that? They don't have to agree to it based on.
They don't have to agree to anything, but
Yeah.
You, Bruce, don't have to buy it. Maybe I'll go buy another house.
Maybe I have a cash deal with no contingency.
Maybe I'll go buy another house. If
Okay.
you're doing that, listen, if you're that bad of an agent, maybe you ought to get out of the business. That would be my advice to that agent. Maybe they ought to get out of the business, because if you cannot get and I'm adamant about this, because if you cannot email a signed document to the buyer's agent immediately, then you don't need to be selling real estate. That was what I would say. Because this should not be an issue. You simply get in an email and you forward it to the buyer's agent immediately. There should be no time lapse between you getting a contract back from your seller and forwarding it to the buyer. It makes no sense that it is not sent to the buyer immediately. All right, let's move on.
I agree with you, but it happens every day.
I don't know who these agents are that's doing it, but you all need to tell them that, I don't know, but I would tell them we're going to re-sign the contract. I would do what Sue said. Say, because you're not, and maybe you should contact their brokers, because maybe they need to take one of these classes. But clearly it makes no sense. I can't make sense of a buyer, an agent being that's incompetence to me. That's you putting your seller in jeopardy. You're doing all kinds of stuff that it just makes no sense to me. I cannot understand that. But let's move on. All right.
Hold on for 1 second, Trent. Let me jump in here. Let me jump in. So Bruce, thanks for bringing that up. Clearly, Trent is very dispassionate about the subject matter. I'm joking around, guys. No, this is good stuff. This is what we need. We need to hear this stuff, because this conversation here is, we're matching up best practices against the nonsense that we see out there, right?
That's true.
And some of the nonsense that we see is different, right? Bruce makes a mention of a cash deal. Some of you maybe aren't dealing with a cash deal. So, but there's probably one somewhere else on the horizon that you don't know about, and the market is just so crazy. So look, this is what this is all about. So bring up those things.
Right.
We love Trent drawing upon his experience, as well as you guys drawing from your experience. So that's what makes this so well.
And yeah, Bruce, don't think I was bad. I appreciate it. I'm glad. Yeah, I love this. No, bring up. Yeah, but I have an issue with agents who don't do this business the way they ought to. So I'm sure that comes across. I have a problem, and when I come across that, I will contact brokers and say, listen, this is what's happening. And maybe brokers don't know. Maybe the broker can tell these agents, listen, you have to submit this offer right away, because the broker will be included in the lawsuit, if there are any kind of mediation or arbitration, they're going to include the broker. So if I'm the broker, I want to know my agent is out there making mistakes that could cause me money or could jeopardize my relationship with that client, because there are definitely ramifications when you don't submit an offer right away, because if the buyer backs out, you got a problem. All right.
And then as we noticed, the alarm literally went off when Trent heard of bad agent behavior. That wasn't his phone. That was his alarm. No, I'm only kidding, guys. All right, Trent, back to you.
All right.
I think there was another question somewhere in there. Fire away.
Yes, I have one more question about this. Say that the buyer's agent misspelled the seller's name. It goes after it's been signed by all parties. It goes back to the buyer's agent to with the correct spelling, and then the buyer has to initial. And shouldn't they date it? And if they initial and date it, does that become the execution date?
Anytime you make changes, it will come, you change, but I'm not sure if changing the name, I'm not sure on that one. If you misspell someone's name,
I don't think so.
if the new execution date, that one I'm not sure. It should be corrected. I don't know if I would even have to be quite honest, if you correct, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know. First of all, it should never happen, but if you should make the change, anything you change, you need the initial. And technically that would be a new execution date, but let's hope none of us ever do that, where we don't misspell somebody's name. If we do by mistake,
Not
correct
necessarily
it.
misspell, but something could have been, maybe the buyer missed a page to it.
Then we have a new execution date, but let's move on, because I don't want to, I think we better get through more of this. All right, but I would initial it, and yeah, technically that's a new execution date, but let's hope that you're not misspelling seller's names. Let's just hope that's not happening. All right, let's go to zoning. On page zoning. If you have a residential property, you don't have to put the zoning classification in this agreement of sale, but you should. I'm a believer that nothing should be left blank in an agreement of sale. Why? Because I don't know if you meant to leave it blank or you forgot to fill it in. So just fill in the zoning classification. But if it is anything other than residential and you don't put in the zoning classification, the buyer can void out this contract. Take a look at paragraph 6, where it says failure of this agreement to contain the zoning classification except in cases where the property is zoned solely or primarily to permit single-family dwellings will render this agreement voidable at the buyer's option. So if you have anything other than single-family, I would still put the zoning classification in, even a single-family. Just put it in there. But if it's anything other than single-family and it's not there, buyer can void out this contract. So the key is just always put the zoning classification in there, period. All right, whether you have to or you don't. But, all right. Paragraph 7, fixtures and personal property. Here's where, I like to call this the chandelier chapter, because this is where you find problems with chandeliers. Seems like this, everybody, well, take a look at the fixtures. So sometimes people don't realize what's in there. So included in this, look at that, 7B, it says including this sale, unless stated otherwise, are all existing items permanently installed in or on the property, all right, free of liens, of course. So anything that's attached or fixed to that property is a part of that property. And if the seller wants to remove any of it, he or she should do it really before they put it on the market. I ask sellers, if you want to remove something, let's take it down. If you want to take that chandelier down, let's take it down before we put it on the market. If not, here's what I would do. And I remember selling a property in Haverford where it was an antique chandelier. My buyer didn't want it, but because he was going to gut the house. It was an antique chandelier, and the seller said, the seller's agent put in trend that the chandelier will be removed and replaced with a comparable chandelier. Well, it turned out this was a 75-year-old chandelier. So when we went back for the pre-sale walkthrough, we didn't care whether to replace it with, because he didn't want it. They put something that looked like a chandelier maybe they picked up at the dollar store. So you got in MLS and an agreement of sale saying that they're going to replace this chandelier with a comparable chandelier. So be careful how you word things. A comparable chandelier, in my opinion, would be another 75-year-old chandelier, not a dollar store chandelier. So, and you're right, I'm going to mention flat screen TVs in a minute, so you're absolutely right there. So if your client says, your seller says, I want to keep the chandelier or I want to replace it, here's what you do. And what I'll do is say, okay, tell me what you're going to replace it with. Go find the chandelier. And we're going to do an addendum that says the seller will replace the chandelier that's in the dining room with this chandelier, the model number, the color, everywhere it's purchased. So now when the buyer signs off, the buyer knows exactly what should be hanging in that dining room when that buyer comes for the pre-settlement walkthrough. If that buyer comes in and you all haven't decided what is going to be replaced, what they're going to replace that chandelier with, then you run into some problems. Because now what the buyer says, I don't like that cheap chandelier you put in there. And that could have, but you know, so just be real specific and have the buyer and the seller sign off on it, because I don't like problems when I'm going to settlement. I see settlement as a celebration because I want to get my money so I can pay my bills. All right. So take a look at this. So it says, it says radiator covers. I've had people remove radiator covers in houses. It's like you need to leave them. Lighting fixtures, including chandeliers, ceiling fans. I've gone and played bath and bedrooms and they remove the ceiling fan. Make sure your sellers know that whatever's in that house at the time that that buyer looks at it should be there when they come back for the pre-settlement walkthrough. If there was a chandelier, if there was a ceiling fan in the bedroom upstairs, in the middle bedroom, it should be there when we come back. They cannot replace it with a cheap one. They can't take the one in the middle bedroom that was more expensive, replace it with a cheap one, and then think you'll buy it. Make sure that you tell your sellers whatever's in this house. Now, if they agree to buy this house, they agreed to buy this house with all the fixtures that they see. You cannot go and replace the oven with a cheaper oven. I've seen that kind of stuff happen. All right. So if you look at lighting fixtures, including chandeliers and ceiling fans, go to garage door openers and transmitters. Seems like you never get those. Here's a big one now, as Corey just said, mounting brackets and hardware for television and sound equipment. You can't remove the hardware on the wall. That is the part, that's a fixture. That's a part of the property. You can remove your TV, but you need to leave the mounting equipment there that's on the wall. If you're going to take it, put it in a contract that says the seller, or you put it here that says the seller is going to remove that the brackets on the wall. But tell your seller you cannot remove anything. This is what I'd say. Anything that you have to do, you need tools to disassemble, they can't take. If I need a tool, it needs to stay there. Just say anything where I can lift out of here is personal property. But if I need a tool to disassemble something, then it's real estate and it needs to stay. All right. Any questions? Oh, go finish. And if you look at storage sheds. Storage sheds seem to be a problem sometimes. I've sold houses, storage shed was gone. Mailboxes, leave mailboxes, existing window screens, shades and blinds, awnings, the oven. Obviously, you need to have the oven there. All right. So make sure the seller does not substitute expensive items for inexpensive items. All right. Any questions? Any comments? Are you all learning anything? No?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah, thank you.
Always.
Well, these said two
Absolutely.
people. All right, let's keep going. All right, so so if anything's excluded, look at paragraph, D, excluded fixtures and items. If you want to exclude that chandelier, put it there. But again, I would be real specific about what I'm going to replace it with. Because you're not going to say I'm going to replace the chandelier and leave a hole in the wall. I'm going to make sure you know exactly. You, the buyer's agent, should not go forward unless you are certain how they're going to replace that. All right. Waive. Let's go to mortgage contingency. If I'm waiving in this crazy seller's market, a lot of buyers are waiving mortgage contingencies so their offer is stronger. So keep in mind that if you're paying cash, you waive it, but you also can waive it and still get a mortgage loan. Some sellers, and you need to let a seller know that just because the buyer waived this is not necessarily a cash deal. it could still be a mortgage loan involved. And you, seller, must cooperate with this lender in the event that this buyer chooses to get a loan. You can't, the seller can't say, well, they waived the mortgage contingency, so I'm not going to let an appraiser come into the house. Or I'm not going to make sure your seller knows that waiving it does not mean they are paying cash. It simply means that their offer is, they're just trying to make their offer stronger, or because, and remember, if it's cash, either way, you need proof of funds. Whether they waive it and get a mortgage loan or not, if the house is $400,000, I need proof. It says here excluded, but photos show chandelier. I mean, how problematic is it? The listing shows. Let me come back to that. Let me finish this thought. What was I saying? Oh, let the seller know that there may be a mortgage loan involved, even if they waive it, and they still have to cooperate. All right, with them if they're going to get that loan. All right, the first mortgage. Now make sure in this box with the first mortgage, you fill this out, the loan amount, the terms, the type of mortgage. Now, here's where I see, and you may find your buyer in default if you make this mistake, but I want you to be aware of this. I see this a lot. Mortgage lender. How many of you have seen they put TD Bank and then you get a mortgage commitment from ABC Bank? And you're like, who is ABC Bank? I've never heard of them. But I know TD Bank, but I have no idea who ABC, and they're in Augusta, Georgia. You can't just change the lender without the buyer, without the seller's permission. You need to get permission. If you put TD Bank here, a conventional loan, the seller's accepting your offer because they believe you're going to get a loan with TD Bank, conventional loan, you put it down 20%. That's one of the reasons the seller may accept your offer. But if they now know that you go into some unknown lender and you get in 100% financing and nobody seems to be doing it, the seller may say, no, you have breached this contract. So make sure, and you see it all the time, if your buyer is going to change lenders, and sometimes maybe they have Wells Fargo and they want to go to Bank of America, no seller is going to say no to that. But just do an addendum and use the change in terms of addendum, and you simply just let them know that we're going to go from Wells Fargo to Bank of America, and most sellers are going to say okay. But they may not say okay if you say I'm going from a conventional at TD Bank to a FHA at Sunoco Mortgage. They may say no. I would say no. All right. Any questions? And also the interest rate. Make sure the interest rate, put numbers there. Don't put, I've seen people put things like prevailing rate. Put the interest rate. Your client is willing to take between 4% interest rate. Buyer agrees to accept the interest rate as may be committed by a mortgage lender, but not to exceed. That second box is the maximum. So you could say, my buyer is willing to take an interest rate of 4% between 4.25. If they get an interest rate higher than 4.25, they don't have to buy this property, and they're entitled to walk away and get their earnest money deposit back. If the lender offers them less than 4%, then they are obligated to go forward with this deal. Do you understand that? If it's less than 4%, or not, that's my example. If it's less than whatever you put in there, then that's a better rate and they must go forward. All right. B, look at B, 8B, the mortgage commitment date. That line is for a mortgage commitment date. When do you believe you will have a mortgage commitment date? Put a realistic date. Don't put, if today is a 11, don't put July 20th. Generally, I think 7 to 10 days before settlement is probably a good amount of time to get a commitment to a mortgage commitment to the seller's agent. You should have a title by then. You probably should have an appraisal by then. All repairs have been negotiated. Everything is probably mostly done. So when you get that mortgage commitment, there may be a few items that the buyer still needs to do. you still need to do. And 107, let me see, somebody said something about 107. I'll come back to that. All right, we'll go back to someone's asking about discount points. What's the question? Discount points. If you, going back to the mortgage loan, you're saying that you're willing to take a loan with X number of discount points. Remember, a discount point is equal to 1% of the loan amount. So if you look down at 107, discount points, loan origination, loan placement, other fees cannot exceed blank. You see that blank? So you're saying, I'm the buyer, I'm the borrower, I'm willing to pay I'm willing to pay up to 1% discount point or 2%, but not if my lender's charging me more than 2, I don't have to buy this house or whatever. If it's 0, if they charge any discount points, then you will be able to walk away and get your earnest money deposit back. That answer the question to whoever just wrote that. Any other questions? Now, here's where I said in the beginning, where I talked about the mortgage commitment date. If you don't get your mortgage commitment date and by the date that you put in the mortgage in that in paragraph 8B, the seller can back out of this deal. The seller can terminate this contract, but your buyer gets his or her earnest money deposit back. That's where lots of people don't seem to understand that. Let me just show you this. All right, look let's say, look at 8B2. Seller may terminate this agreement by written notice of buyer after the date indicated above if the documentation demonstrating the lender's conditional approval does not satisfy the terms of if they change something, they can back out. If it's not, well, let's go to 3. I want to go to 3. If this agreement is terminated, the mortgage is not obtained for settlement, all deposit monies will be returned to the buyer. Buyer will be responsible for any cost, but all the money, deposit monies will be returned to the buyer if the seller terminates this agreement because that buyer did not get a mortgage commitment to him or her by that date. Your buyer is able to get his or her money back, but the seller can terminate this, so be mindful of that. In a market like we're in, seller may think, hey, I may get more money, so I'm gonna terminate this. I'm okay with terminating. So if that mortgage commitment date, make sure it's a realistic date. And if you don't believe you're gonna meet it, again, what do? Put together an addendum, ask the seller to give you a 3-day or 4-day extension. All right. Now let me. Do we have? This is one thing I just want. Look at. Do we have the what is it? Oh, my mind went blank. The agreement sale release and the termination. Where are they? I want you to take a look at where are they? The agreement sale release and the termination. I want to just show you something. Again, I think a lot of people seem to mess this up. Take a look at just so you know when you use these forms, because we tend to misuse them. If you use a notice of termination agreement sale, if you're terminating this contract, let's say because the buyer does a home inspection, does not like the results of the home inspection, buyer has a right to terminate, right? That's what the agreement sale says. Buyer has a right to terminate his contract, right? Use the notice of termination agreement, a sale. This is a unilateral contract. Only one party needs to sign this. That will be the party that is terminating the contract, all right? If my buyer does a home inspection, does not like the results and says, I want out, I would have them sign a notice of termination of agreement sale. And if you look at that, it's not the seller and the buyer signing, only the person that's terminated. The terminating party is the only person required to sign this. You send this over to the broker for the seller, and that broker ought to return the earnest money deposit to the buyer. A lot of brokers don't seem to understand this either. Just me, and I'll give you another example when you can use on the seller side. If the seller, talking about the mortgage commitment date, you don't meet the mortgage commitment date, it was due 2 days ago, seller says, I'm going to terminate this contract. And you always have to terminate by written notice. I'm going to terminate this contract. Then the seller would sign the notice of termination of agreement sale. The seller would be the only one. sending it over to your broker, the broker for the agent for the buyer, saying, I'm terminating this contract. I don't need the buyer to sign off. The contract enables me to terminate it if you don't get a mortgage commitment on or before the date that you put here. I don't need the seller to sign off on this because the contract gives me the right, if I'm the buyer and I do a home inspection, the contract gives me a right to terminate this contract if I'm not happy with the results of the home inspection. Is that clear? Any questions?
Karen, I have a
Now,
question.
when you need the agreement of sale release, that is a bilateral document. Both the buyer and the seller have to do that, sign that. That's generally when there is an issue. Okay, and as when we have to determine who is going to get this money back, because there's no issue unless, now if there is an issue, let's say even though I signed the notice of termination and I don't have to get the seller to sign, but the seller objects and says, no, do not give that money back, then the broker should not do it. But you don't need the seller's permission if you're the broker to return the money to the buyer who terminates because he or she's not happy with the results of the home inspection. Is that clear? Does anybody have any questions about that?
I think we just did have someone trying to ask a question there, so
That was me. So,
go for it.
but the broker can't release the deposit regardless, even without the, like the second form, the release form?
Not
Saying-
unless both parties have signed.
Right, okay.
Yeah, but the first form, the notice of termination only requires one signature. The agreement sale release requires both the seller and the buyer. So if the seller doesn't sign, the broker can't release the money. But the broker can release it if there's a notice of termination because the seller doesn't need to return it, to sign it. But I would say as a broker, if my seller says, I have a problem with that, don't give the money back, then I wouldn't. But I'm not going to ask my seller. I'm just going to give it back because I don't need permission from my seller to return the money. In the example I use, where a buyer says, I'm not buying the house because I don't like the results of the home inspection report, I'm going to terminate the contract. I'm sending this over to me. If an agent send it over to me, I'll just release a check to him. I wouldn't ask the seller's permission because I don't need the seller's permission. Any questions or comments? All right.
Trent, I don't mean to start with you again, but isn't it a two-part? There's like a two-part form. That's the termination, which I agree, it's unilateral, and whether you're right or not, if you sign it, you terminate it. And then there's a bottom part that deals with the release of the funds that both sides have to agree to.
No, but you also
funds,
have
no?
them, Bruce. They're also separate forms. You can have what you're talking about. There's a form called TARAREL, where it has both the notice of termination and the agreement sale release. But you can also get them separate. If you go on Zip forms, they're also just a notice of termination agreement sale by itself, and there's also an agreement sale release by itself. But I would not use, and that's the problem where a lot of agents mess up, where they use the dual form. Don't use that. If the buyer if you're terminating simply because the buyer does not want to go forward after the agreement sale, after the inspection, you ought to just use the notice of termination. Don't use the other form, because the agreement sale gives this buyer the right to terminate if he or she's not happy with the results of a home inspection. You don't need, that's not a bilateral form. You need one party, only one person has the right to terminate. In this case, it would be the buyer.
So I don't understand, when do you use the other form that requires signatures from buyer?
The only time you should use it any other time other than when the buyer, I know of 2 times in the contract where, in this agreement sale, where I would use the notice of termination. The only time I can think of is with the home inspection and the mortgage contingency. The mortgage commitment date, I'm sorry. The contract is clear that the buyer has a right to terminate if they're not pleased with the home inspection. So they have a right to terminate, use a notice of termination. The agreement sale is clear. The seller has a right to terminate this contract if your buyer does not produce a mortgage commitment on or before the date in the contract. They have a right to terminate. use that notice of termination. Anything else, I would use the release. Make it easy. Any other time, I would use the release. All right. All right, go to, now, here is something else that I just, have anybody seen when you're buying properties as is? And I see agents, now I want you all to think of this because I think we've all made this mistake. You buy the property as is. Does that mean that the seller has to do no repairs?
No. Trent, no. I've
What
actually
repairs
seen
does he
it.
have to
Yes.
do?
What'd you say,
Means the
Trent?
buyer,
What was that?
the seller has to do no repairs. It's as is.
Okay, okay.
I've actually had a different experience. Just because it's as is, I don't go just off of that. I'll actually call the agent just
No,
to
no,
make
no,
sure.
no, that's not my question. All right, no, I'm saying your seller agrees, you all sign a contract that says you are selling this house as is. Is there anywhere in this contract that the seller may have to do repairs? That's what I
Sure.
think.
Sure, that's doing the appraisal. If the appraiser goes in and calls for repairs,
Okay,
you
all
know,
right,
that is,
go on.
yeah, that is binding
Okay.
by the seller.
All right, so I want, and it actually, most appraisal, and that's absolutely, the appraiser could be one. What's another one? It could be the homeowners insurance company may require some repairs. The city, in order to get the UNO, may require some repairs. Here's what I want you to be mindful of. And you see people, some sellers, some buyers will say, you're buying this property, we're selling this to you as is. But then the insurance company comes back and says, wait a minute, in order for this person to get insurance, Mr. Seller, you need to do this. Well, if the seller says, I'm not willing to do it, the buyer can terminate this contract. So make sure your sellers are aware and your buyers are aware. Well, if you're writing it up, make sure, if you're on the seller side, make sure you say, if it's as is, you better put in there that the seller's not making repairs. If the appraiser calls for them, it's going to be up to the buyer to make those repairs at the buyer's expense. If the UNO requires repairs, it's going to be up to the buyer to make repairs at his or her expense. And if the homeowner's insurance company requires repairs, it's going to be up to the buyer to pay for those repairs at his or her expense. Make sure, and I'm thinking I've seen that happen several times where people came back and said, I said it's as is, and your seller thought it was as is, and then the insurance company or appraisal saying make these repairs. If it's as is and you don't plan to make any repairs, make sure you make that clear in the contract. All right? Because I'm looking at G. I'm at what paragraph are we on? 8G, where it says if the mortgage lender or a property and casual insurer provided insurance required by the mortgage lender requires repairs to the property, the buyer will, upon receiving the requirements, deliver a copy to the seller. And then it talks about if the seller makes the repairs and the buyer has to buy the property. But then it says that if the seller will not make the repairs, then the buyer can make the repairs him or herself and move forward. Or look at B, 2B. G2B, the buyer can terminate. There goes that word again, can terminate and use the notice of termination. Terminates agreement by written notice to the seller with deposits returned to the buyer. So you need to make sure if it's as is and the seller does not intend to make any repairs, make sure you are very clear about repairs. All right. Any questions, comments? Yes, no? No. All right. Let's go look at 9, paragraph 9. That's clear. I'm gonna go a little faster. What time is it? 10:30. Change in terms. Change in buyer's financial. Just make sure. This is one that just says if your buyer changes jobs or anything, the buyer needs to alert the seller. Needs to alert the mortgage company. If the buyer gets laid off or the buyer. Now here's where I just tell buyers, we all should do this. Tell buyers, do not make major purchases before you buy this house. Make sure you don't go out and buy a car. I remember having a client who 2 weeks before settlement, she went out and bought she went to Raymore and Flanagan and bought a whole house full of furniture. It cost her, I think, $25,000. Well, now her ratios were off and she couldn't buy the house. I hated Raymore and Flanagan because I needed that settlement. Every time I drove by it, I spit. I was like, darn, that Raymore and Flanagan. Don't tell your seller, your buyers, do not buy anything until the settlement is over. Go after the settlement, but don't make purchases. I actually tell my buyers, don't even give your social security number to anybody until after settlement, because now your ratios may be off and you may not be able to buy the house. I had that happen one time and it was sad because she had spent too much money. She had just made it, we're about to go to settlement, and they run things and this is popping up and there's a problem. And they said, well, you can't afford to buy this house, but you can buy something 25,000 less. And she was just devastated. She didn't buy it, and she lost her deposit also. So don't buy anything. And you see the last thing, it says buy it. Well, let's go 10, seller's representation. Obviously, if we're in the city, it's going to be the status of water be public. If we're in the city, B, the status of sewer will be public. All right, let's go over to E on seller's disclosure law. Now, there is a new seller's disclosure that just came out July 1st. I don't know if you're aware. The seller's disclosure was just updated on July 1st. It is actually a better job. They didn't make a lot of changes. They added the boxes that the seller has to check. They put that on the right-hand side. They clarified some stuff, and they added a section about pools and spas. But for the most part, it's the same. They just made it better. But here's what I want to think. One thing, let me ask you, here's where I come across the issues a lot. An estate, we talk about estate, does an executor or an administrator have to fill out a seller's disclosure? Is that one of the requirements, or is that an exception, one exempt part? Does the executor of an estate have to fill out a seller's disclosure? Anybody? Somebody help me?
It is not required, but is advisable if they know of the property.
All right, I would agree with
I
you.
said
Carl.
no.
You say they don't have to, but is advisable. I wouldn't use the word advisable. I'm with you part of it. They are required to disclose anything they know, any material defects about the property. This is where a lot of agents get it wrong. You're right about it is one of the 10, there are 10 exemptions to the seller's real estate seller, the real estate disclosure law. There are 10 exemptions. The one exemption, and take a look at this, if you have the seller's disclosure, the number, what number is it? It's number, wait a minute. I don't even see it. Transfer. Oh, they got it number 1 now. They changed it number 1. Transfers by a fiduciary during the administration of a decedent estate, guardianship, conservatorship, or trust. You are exempt. There are 10 people who are exempt. If you're the executor or administrator of your mother's estate, your grandmother's estate, you are exempt. However, take a look at this, and this is a key on the first page of the new seller's disclosure. Look at that box that says executor, administrator, trustee signature block. It says, according to the provisions of the real estate seller disclosure law, the undersigned executor, administrator, or trustee is not required to fill out a seller's disclosure. We're there. But look at the next line. The executor, administrator, or trustee must, not advise, not advisable. They must, however, disclose any known material defects of the property. So if you are the administrator or the executor of someone's estate, and you know the roof was leaking 2 weeks ago, then you have to disclose that. You can't just say, as some agents just give you a blank form and put X's through every page and say, we're not required to fill this out. You're still, you're required to fill out or disclose anything you know. You're not just required to go out and find out if the roof ever leaked. You're only required to fill out what it is that you know. All right, any questions? And remember, a seller's disclosure is only required if it's 1 to 4 units. If it's 5 units, we consider that commercial and it's not required. So if you have a 5-unit building, the seller's disclosure law does not apply, only if there's 1 to 4 units. All right.
Trent, real quick. So to make it clear, if it is a property being sold as is, residential property being sold as is, it is okay to do the X's if the executor or the owner does not know anything, right? Because I see a lot of agents do that.
Right. If they don't know anything, right.
Okay.
I would do that too. But,
okay.
But keep in mind this, a lot of them are the children or the grandchildren. They know something about the house. Most executors, administrators are the children. I mean, so you know the roof leaked. You were there when your mother put the bucket there. So you know it leaked. Disclose it. All right. Because here's the thing. No one has ever been sued for disclosing too much, but people get sued all the time for disclosing too little. And I tell people, if there's a lawsuit in real estate, this is what I tell my sellers, it's probably coming from this document. Take your time filling it out. Fill it out as completely and honestly as you possibly can. If you don't need to ask for help, it's not my information, my knowledge about your property, it's your knowledge. You don't have to go and ask anybody about what kind of piping do I have, what kind of amber. It's your knowledge. If you're the seller, you fill it out to the best of your ability, just complete it. You cannot ever help a seller complete a seller's disclosure. If you want to be included in a lawsuit, feel free to do that, because if there is a problem with that seller's disclosure and that seller didn't disclose something or lied about it and you help them, they're going to say that you answered, that my agent answered that question. Now you are part of the lawsuit. Don't help sellers fill this out. Do not sit there while they fill it out. Give it to them and run out the door so they can't ask you a question.
Thanks, Trent.
All right, go down to, let's go down to due diligence. Let's go to paragraph 12. We're talking about, what time is it? Inspections. Let's talk about inspections. First of all, I just want you to, like some people don't realize this, look at A1. It says only the parties and their real estate licensees may attend any inspections. You can't, this is not the time when you take all your family members into someone's house that you haven't bought yet to look at it. This is a time for you to do home inspections. It says only, and let's be clear, only the parties in the contract. So technically, if I'm the seller, I could say to you, you can't even bring your boyfriend or your girlfriend who's not a part of this contract. You can't bring your parents. Only people who are allowed allowed in inspections are the people who are on the contract and the licensee. So be mindful of that. Tell your client this is not the time to bring all your cousins to someone's house. All right. This is not the time. Tell them after you can come to the open house, to the housewarming, but not to the home inspection. All right. I've seen carloads of people pull up on home inspections, and I've had to tell some of my clients before, listen, tell these people go home. I'm not allowing all these people in this area. Even though it's a vacant property, I'm not allowing all these people in this house. So tell them on the front end so they don't bring Uncle Billy and everybody else. All right.
Thank you so much for that.
Why is that?
Yes, thank you.
I know, because I've made that mistake too many times, and it's cost me a deal. But I really appreciate you clearing that up.
Oh, well, good. Oh, okay. Well, I never know what I'm gonna hit. Well, thank you, but I trust me, it happens a lot, doesn't it? Happens a lot. So yeah, I have that conversation with buyers up front. This is who you can bring, and if there's anybody outside of, like, let's say is a couple and the girlfriend's buying it, but her boyfriend wants to come, I do everything in writing. I'll do an addendum saying that this John Smith will also attend settlement with the buyer and get the seller to sign off. I want everything in writing. I don't want anything verbal. I want to, that way you cannot say he can't show up because we have an addendum that said he can be there. All right. All right, so let's look at 2. It says buyers may make, again, look at this. Buyer can only make 2 pre-settlement walkthroughs. You cannot come to these people's houses 20 times to measure, to see if your furniture will fit. Or you have 2 opportunities, not counting the home inspection. Outside of the home inspection, you have 2 times where you can come into this house. 2 opportunities. And the seller can say, I had a seller say, they came in like 4 times, seller let them, then she got tired. And you know what she said? They're not allowed in my house anymore. And you know what? They couldn't come in anymore. That was it. They couldn't even come in she said, I'm tired of these people keep calling. And so they can't, and she kept letting them in. And the 5th time she said, they're not, she asked me, she said, what does the contract say? I said, well, the contract says they're allowed 2 times. She said, they've been in there 4, well, they're not coming back anymore. That's the only time I've had that happen. But they could not even do a pre-settlement walkthrough. So just be mindful that you have 2 opportunities to do walkthroughs. Make sure a seller will have all heating and utilities on. How many times have you done home inspections? I know Corey's a home inspector. How many times have you gone to home inspections and utilities aren't on, water's not on, lights not on? Make sure if you're the seller's agent that all utilities are on. If you have to go there yourself and check. And if you're the buyer's agent, make sure you contact the seller's agent to find out that everything's on, because home inspectors will charge you a fee to come back. I mean, they may be able to do some of the home inspection, but you don't want to do a home inspection with no water or no lights. All right, so make sure everything is off. And I'm gonna just go to let's look at page 7. Look at the home inspection. Look at page 7, where you're electing what you're electing and waiving. If you're doing a home inspection, you're obviously going to elect it. If you're going to waive it, make sure that they put initials. Don't put a check. I've gotten a grievance of sale back where, how do you handle this? I didn't see that. Make sure they don't put a check mark or an X in that box. Make sure they put a signature, an initial, so they can't come back and say, wait, I didn't mean to elect that. I didn't mean to waive it. I meant to elect it. Have them put their initial, because then they may say, I didn't initial that. Just make sure. I've seen X's and no, I want initials. Put initials in those boxes, so it's clear that they're waiving it or they're electing it. All right. And remember, if you go to the next page, remember, if you are selling a house that's built before 1978, not if it was built in 1978, only if it was built prior to 1978, you have to have that residential, and I think we have that also, the residential lead-based paint hazard disclosure form that the seller is required. Anytime you sell a residential, not commercial, a residential property that was built pre-1978. If it was built in 1978, it's not required. Pre-1978, that seller must disclose anything that he or she knows about the presence of lead-based paint, all right? Or if they ever had tests done, or they have to disclose that. They have to give you copies of that stuff. So anything they know about lead-based paint, they have to disclose. All right, and they also, and if you look at page 8, says regardless of whether this inspection is elected or waived, the Residential Lead-Based Paint Hazard Reduction Act requires a seller of property built prior to 1978 to provide the buyer with the EPA-approved lead hazard information pamphlet titled "Protect Your Family from Lead." You all have seen this. You have to make sure your buyer has this. It's actually up to the seller to provide it to the buyer, but most agents provide it to the buyer themselves. I usually have my buyer's sign and date. So I just make a copy of the front so I can show proof that I gave this. Always, people, protect yourself. I've never had a lawsuit. I've never had anybody file complaints against me. Take your time with this. You know, it's easier to to just have them, I want proof that I gave you what I mandated to give you. So I'm just going to have you copy, I'll make a copy of this, and I just have you sign and date that you received the entire protective family from Lien. So if anybody came back and said, I did not get the protective family from Lien, I would go to my file and it would say, oh, I received the entire copy of protected from Lien, and you signed and dated it. All right. And then of course you have to get then you just need to disclose. Where is it? Oh, along with, you have to give that protected family from Lien along with a separate form, and that's that residential lead-based paint form. Attaches agreement disclosing the seller's knowledge of lead-based paint hazards and any lead-based paint records regarding the property. And that is a residential. So you have to give the residential lead-based paint hazards disclosure form as well as the protective family from lead in your home. Make sure that the buyer has both of those. Make sure the buyer has both of those forms. All right. Any questions? The seller should consider.
What do you say if a buyer still wants to have lead
An
based
inspection.
inspection?
Well,
Yeah.
you can't tell them no, but I've never had it happen. But what I do tell them, I'll say, find a company, because I'm not gonna find a company for you, and talk to them. Because one thing I do say is that you have the right to do it. But now, of course, I think it's nuts to do it, but I can't tell you that. But I do say this, that if the house was built before 1978, in all likelihood, you're gonna find lead-based paint.
Yeah.
All right, so you probably are going to find it. I'm not sure, but you probably will find it. So now what do we do once we discover that you find it? Is the seller going to scrape all the lead-based paint off of the walls and repaint the house? Probably not.
Mhm.
But so what happens if you discover it? In all likelihood, it's going to be there, but go talk to a professional. Go talk to a person who conducts these things. And when they go, I had 2 people do it. I talked to people, but they came back and said it was like $3,000 or something.
Mhm.
They quickly said, oh no. But I never tell somebody don't do something, because if you don't do it and then there's a problem that results
Mhm.
from it, they're going to tell you, hey, my agent told me not to do it. I give you facts, I give you information, you decide what to do. But I am going to tell you that this house was built in 1965. It probably has lead-based paint. But you have a right, you have a federal law requires that gives you the right to conduct an assessment, a lead-based assessment of this property to determine if it's lead-based paint. Well, you can give me the $3,000 because it's lead-based paint, but I can't say that. All right. All right, go down to inspection contingency. Let's get to chapter 13. Inspection contingency. You have, if you leave this blank, then be mindful of this. You have 10 days to do a home inspection. If you leave it blank, 10 days. All right. And remember, that's 10 days from the execution date. So if the execution date is today, you start counting tomorrow. You have 10 days to do a home inspection. Again, let's go about time is of the essence. If you don't do it in those 10 days, you waive the right. You can do one, the seller may let you do it, but you waive that provision. You waive that in the contract. So the seller could simply say, no, you can't do it. Or the seller may say you can do it, but I'm just not gonna, don't send me, I'm not doing any repairs. All right, so you have 10 days. It says within this contingency, I'm on 13A. The contingency period is 10 days from the execution date of this agreement for each inspection. If you're doing radon, termite, any of the inspections. All right. And then B, it says within that contingency period, if the results, and this is one thing that people know when I was serving on the Pennsylvania, on the board, on Pennsylvania Association of Realtors, and I was on the professional, not the professional standards, I was on that too. What is it? What's the forms? Standard forms committee. And this is one of the changes they made. I'm clear to everybody. I thought this was a mistake. I thought this was a mistake, but I live up with whatever they agree, I go with. But I can tell you all, I think it was the worst thing, that mistake change they made to this contract was right here. If the results of this inspection are satisfactory, I'm on 13B1. If you do the home inspection and you're fine with the results, if you buy the property and don't ask for any repairs, what do you have to do? This is where I have a problem. You have to present all reports in their entirety to the seller, accept the property's information, blah, blah, blah. So even if I buy your property, do a home inspection, I have no issues with it, I want to buy, I still have to give the seller the entire home inspection report, which I disagree with. Number two, if the results of any inspection are unsatisfactory, if you do a home inspection, you're not happy with it, and you back away, you say, I'm walking away, I'm gonna terminate it, I'm gonna use that notice of termination form, I still have to give the entire form, the entire inspection report to the seller. Now think about that. I don't want your property. You, seller, don't know what the issues are with your property. A home inspector who you didn't hire, seller, who you don't even know if they're competent, they give you a home inspection on your property. And I'm not arguing that I believe most incompetent, but you are competent, but you don't know anything. You didn't hire this person. And now you have a home inspection report that may have a mistake, and you have to turn that home inspection report over to the next buyer who looks at that property. I gave you an example why I hated this. Years ago, I was selling a property. I was a listing agent. They did a home inspection. The home inspector said that there was mold in the basement. It was an older woman who lived there alone. It was, I mean, I thought it was mold, but we hire a mold remediation person, and the buyer backed out, but I said, let's take care of this mold. We hired someone, I got someone for him. I was there and he's laughing. And I said, what's funny? He says, Trent, this is not mold, this is dirt. Well, the buyers backed out because they say they were so afraid of mold. The new people who came to look at it, I had to give the report that says there's mold. Now I was able to attach this report from this new person that says it's not mold, but I want you to think about this. If I get a report that says there's mold and then the seller does one that says no mold, who are you gonna believe? You're gonna believe that that's mold. And you know what? We end up having to sell that house for maybe 10,000 less than we should have, because everybody I gave that report to said, oh, there's mold. I said, well, no, we had it. They said it was dirt. Oh, yeah, right, Trent. That's kind of what I got. Yeah, right. So my seller was penalized because she had to give, or I had to give a home inspection report that was inaccurate to a potential buyer. I don't believe a seller, if they don't want a home inspection report, shouldn't be required to take one. But that's what it used to be, but they changed it. But anyhow, 3, you go back. 1, if you're happy with the inspection, you have to still turn over the inspection report, whether you're asking for repairs or not. 2, if you're not happy with it and you back away from the deal, you still have to turn over the report. And 3, if the results of any inspection are unsatisfactory, you can present, and you want, I'm sorry, where is it? If the results are unsatisfactory, the buyer can present a written corrective proposal, which would be, a negotiation. They may say, okay, but they still have to turn over the inspection report, but they may ask for repairs or credit, but now you're just negotiating. So you have 10 days to do this inspection. Make sure you do it. And here's what I would advise. If you are negotiating right now, today, and you really think you're gonna get that deal, set it up for Monday. Go in and get a spot with the home inspector. If you think it's going to happen, set it up. Don't wait till the 9th day to do an inspection because things can happen. Maybe the buyer gets sick. Maybe the home inspector gets sick. Just do that home inspection as quickly as you can in case anything happens. All right? So,
Trent,
yes.
I have a question. Go ahead. Okay, so my question is, what does it say in the contract that the seller has to provide that inspection to the next buyer?
Well, because you as a seller must disclose any material defects that you know about the property. You may not have known before that home inspection report that there are termites. Well, now a professional went in there and said there are termites. You may not have known that the roof was leaking or roof was bad or your heater had issues. Well, now you have a professional who said those are issues. Well, now you know. That's why I don't think you should have it. Now you know, so you have to turn it over. So there's nothing that says it here, but you are obligated, but it says that you have to, the sellers, you have to always give the buyer, disclose any material defects. That is a material defect if you have termites. That's a material defect if you have mold. That's a material defect if you have a leaky roof or malfunctioning furnace. You have, and if that, you get that information from the disclosure, from the seller's disclosure, not the seller's disclosure, from the home inspection report, I just turn over the whole inspection report to the potential buyer, because now you can go through and you can write it on the home on your seller's disclosure. I wouldn't do that. Just give them the thing. Now, you're not giving it to them for them to use for their own purpose. You're only giving it to them to disclose the issues with the property. Some buyers will then say, and don't do this, hey, we got the home inspection, we don't need to do one. That is a deadly mistake, because that home inspection was not done for you, it was done for another person. So if that home inspector, for instance, made a mistake, you can go back to the home inspector, because he'll say, I didn't do this for you, I did this for these people. You shouldn't even have my report. I didn't do that. You cannot come back to me that because there was a mistake and you relied on a home inspection report that was not done for you. But somebody asked a good question, and I just, somebody asked a question about can you cross out that you don't want the report? The inspection report. I would argue you can, but I wouldn't. And why is that? Because, so now think of this. I'm going to say to my seller, we don't want a copy of the inspection report. Therefore, we don't have to turn over anything we don't have to disclose any issues, because now we don't know about them. I don't know if saying I'm going to be blind about my issues with my property will hold up in court if the buyer sues you later on. I would just disclose. I'm a believer that disclose everything you know, and no one ever can come back, and that won't be a problem. But if I'm now saying, I don't want to know that I've terminated, I don't want to know that my roof is bad, I would not cross it out. I hate it, but I comply. I will give it to you, and I'll let bygones be bygones. Any questions, comments? All right. Now, let's go back to 13B. You got 10 days to do a home inspection unless you change it. Now, after the home inspection, go down to 3A. You have what we call a negotiation period. You have 10 days to leave it blank to do a home inspection. Look at 3A. Following the end of the contingency period, the buyer and the seller will have you leave it blank 5 days for a negotiation period. So you have 5 days to negotiate. So, all right, so that means you can now, if you do your home inspection earlier, you don't lose those days, all right? You just add them on. You have a total, if you look at this, 17 days. So you have 10 days to do a home inspection, 5 days for the negotiation period. Now, during that negotiation period, it says that if you all can't come to a resolution, then make sure that you got 5 days. Let's say you did your inspection on the 10th day, you're negotiating the fifth 5 days. Your negotiation does not extend because you are actively negotiating with the seller. You need to send an addendum extending that period if you need more time. Don't assume that I did my inspection in 10 days. Now here's the 5th day during the negotiation period. We're negotiating in good faith. On the 6th day, the seller says, I'm terminating the contract. Seller can do that. Negotiation period is over. If you need more time, ask more time, get everything in writing. So you have to, now, if during that negotiation period, you all can't come to a resolution, then you go to B, 3B, it says, if no mutually acceptable written agreement is reached, or if the seller doesn't respond during that negotiation period, then the buyer can do one or two things. One, they can accept the property with the information, or they can terminate this agreement and have their earnest money deposit returned to them. So you have 10 days to do a home inspection, 5 days to negotiate. And if you can't resolve it during those, or can't come to a resolution in those 5 days, you have 2 days to either decide what you're gonna do, whether you're gonna accept the property where it is, or you're gonna terminate. Yes, question? Hello? Any questions, comments?
And then we have to make sure you have enough for settlement. You know what I mean?
What was that?
I could possibly get the 29 for down payment. Okay, cool.
All right, number 14, paragraph 14. Any comments or questions? You all learning?
Yeah,
stuff?
yeah, I have a question.
Yes, Perry.
Does an early,
Hold on a second. That pixel 3, can we can hear you. Yeah, let's go on, Perry.
all right, does an early inspection, say they have 10 days, but they get it done in 5, does that change the time frame for the contingency period?
No, you have 17. Just think of this way. You have 17.
Okay. Would it be helpful?
All right, Pixel 3, get your act together. If not, we're going to have to put you in a timeout. Okay, keep yourself on mute. Thank you.
All right, Trent, I didn't hear the response. There was interruption.
Trent's on mute.
Trent, you're on mute.
All right, I'm off of mute. Okay, if you do the home inspection early, do you basically lose time? The answer is no. You have a total of 17 days, 10 days. So if I did the home inspection in 5 days, I don't lose those 5 days. I'm not penalized for doing a home inspection early. I just have an extra 5 days to negotiate.
All right, thank you.
All right. All right, go to paragraph 14, title, surveys and costs. All right, here's one where I think makes no sense. So, and I bet you everybody here who's done real estate longer than a day will agree. Within 7 days, if it's left blank from the execution date of this agreement, buyer will order a title. Who orders title in the first 7 days if they're not going to settlement for 45 days, 60 days? You don't even have your home inspection done yet, and you're ordering title. So what happens if you order title and you have to cancel it because the buyer walks away because of they don't want the property after the home inspection report? What happens? You may have to pay a cancellation fee to the title company. So I'm never going to order a title in 7 days. I would probably change that to 15 days or something. At least by then, you know whether you're moving forward. The home inspection deals will die. They either go forward or they would die based on the results of a home inspection. So I wouldn't order a title before I know whether or not we're moving forward. All right, let me just show you something else here. Look at E for a minute. No, first go to C, title. I just want you to show, so buyer will pay the following. Buyer is responsible for the title search, title insurance, or the fee for cancellation, home flood insurance, fire insurance, 3 appraisal fees, and D would be surveys. Now, E says that the property will be conveyed with good and marketable title by the seller, free of all liens and all. Seller has to be to give marketable title. But here's the issue. I want you to see this. A lot of people don't realize this. G, look at 14G. If that seller is not able to give good and marketable title that is insurable by a reputable title insurance company at regular rates, buyer may terminate this, again, as I terminate, may terminate this agreement by written notice to the seller with all the money deposits, with their deposit monies returned to them. But I want you to look at the next sentence, which says, upon termination, a lot of people don't know this is here. All deposit monies will be returned to the buyer, and look at, I'm looking at the next side, and seller will reimburse the buyer for all costs incurred by the buyer for any inspections or certifications obtained according to the agreement. And look at, now go back and look at, finish, it says 14C. We just looked at 14C1, title insurance. 14C2, homeowners insurance. 14C3, appraisal fees. 14D, survey. So any cost that your buyer incurred as a result of the purchase of this property, and the seller cannot deliver marketable title, and that means you can't buy this property, give that seller an invoice and ask that seller to reimburse the buyer for, you may have paid $700 for an appraisal. You may have paid another $600 or $700 for an inspection. You may have done a radon. You may have already ordered homeowners insurance. Whatever you paid, the seller needs to reimburse you. All right, any questions? All right, go to 15B. How much time we have? 15.
Would be inspection included in that?
What was that? I think you're on mute, whoever was saying something.
Trent, would be inspection included in that?
Say that again.
The inspection, property inspection included in that amount that the seller will have
It
to
doesn't
return?
say that, but I believe it is, because it says, go back and look, it says for any inspections. I would include homeowners. I mean, I would include inspection. Yeah, I mean, the home inspection, I would include it because it says here, any inspections or certifications. Now, it doesn't spell that out in the paragraph 14C, but I think any is clear. If I paid $600 to get a home inspection and you did not, and you can't sell the house, I shouldn't be out any money. I should be made whole because you're the one that can't sell the house. I'm not backing out. You're the one that can't sell the house to me. So I would include anything. If I ordered appraisal, whatever I put out, I'm going to send a list to you, Mr. Seller, and ask for reimbursement. Let them say no, but I would include it. All right, look at 15. Notices, assessments, and municipal requirements. I just want to see B, 15B. This is about the city cert or the UNO. Says a seller will order, required by law, which it is, 30 days from the execution date of this agreement, but in no case later than 15 days prior to settlement, the seller will order at the seller's expense a certification from the appropriate municipal department, disclose a notice of any corrected violations of zoning, housing, building safety, or fire ordinances, and or a certificate permitting occupancy of the property. So make sure, and then here's one of those things that if you buy it as is, who's responsible for this? Make sure if you think your seller is selling a property as is, make sure you make it clear that the seller is a buyer's responsible ordering UNO, and the buyer's responsible making any repairs necessary to get that UNO. So if you think you're supposed to be selling it completely as is, don't have that buyer come back later and say, oh, wait a minute, I tried to get a UNO and here's a list of violations. Mr. Seller, you need to take care of them. Well, if I thought I was selling it as is, you may have an angry seller because the seller thought that they were selling this property to this buyer as is this price, and then the buyer comes back asking for repairs. So remember, if it's as is, make sure you think about the issues, the repairs that may come up from an appraisal, the repairs that may come up from a city cert or the UNO, and the repairs that may come up from homeowners insurance. Just be mindful of those. Most agents never think of those things. All right, just make sure if it's as is, address those issues up front so the buyer can't come back and say, I want you to make these repairs so I can get homeowners insurance. Well, I want you to make these repairs because the appraisal company is asking. Well, I want you to make these repairs because the city of Philadelphia is requiring me to take care of these violations before I can get a city cert. All right. Look at 16 condos. If you're selling condos, obviously you would check that. And make sure if you are selling condos, you get the condo documents. You have to order a resale certificate. If you're the seller's agent, well, you see it here. It says that section 3407 of the Uniform Condominium Act of Pennsylvania requires sellers to furnish buyers with a certificate of resale and copies of the condominium declaration, the bylaws, and the rules and regulations of the association. So make sure you get all the bylaws, you get the condo docs, and then the buyer always has 5 days to back out once that buyer receives the condo docs, because that buyer doesn't know what they say. So once you get those condo docs, the buyer has 5 days where they can say, you know what, I read the condo docs, it says I can't rent, I thought I could rent, I'm not buying it. All right, so that's why you want to give you the seller's agent, get the condo docs to the buyer as soon as possible, because you don't want to get the condo docs to the buyer a week before settlement, and they learn that they can't rent the property but 1 month out of the year, and they decide they don't want to do it, buy it. So if you take a look at paragraph C, and it says within 15 days from the execution date of this agreement, the seller, at the seller's expense, will request from the association a certificate of resale. So you're the agent, within 15 days, you have to request that resale certificate. And the resale certificate just tells you all the expenses, all the fees that are required to be paid by this unit owner. If there are capital expenses that may be coming, anything that's what's a monthly condo fee, what the taxes, all the fees will be in that resale certificate, so you know exactly what your financial responsibilities are. All right, so Fernan, get that within 15 days. Again, I would get it to them as soon as I can. But look at 3, where it says the act provides that a buyer may declare this agreement void at any time before the buyer receives the association document. So if you haven't gotten them to them yet, they can back out. And then for 5 days after receipt, they can back out, or until settlement, whichever occurs first. So while they're waiting for the condo documents, they can decide they don't want to go forward. When you give them the condo docs, they have 5 days to decide whether they're going to go forward or not, because there are condos that have a lot of things in them that people don't like. I mean, my unit here in Florida, the condo doc won't allow you to rent. Now, this is one thing they fight every day, because they're trying to get rentals, short-term rentals, and we can't rent. In my condo docs, it says, but I didn't want to rent, but it said that if you rent your unit, the first violation, you have to pay the condo association all the money that you receive from the tenant, from the renter, plus $1,000 fee for every night they stay. If you do it a second time and get caught, you have to turn over all the money that you receive from the renter, plus you pay $5,000 a night for every night that they were here. The third time, I think, is either $10,000 a night, or you have to sign over. At one point, you have to sign your unit over to the association. So make sure you know what's in a condo doc, because before you go and buy it, make sure your client understands what's in it. All right, any questions? Let's look at 18. Where are we? Seller will maintain this property specifically listed in his agreement in its present condition, normal wear and tear accepted. Make sure your seller knows that once this property goes under contract, it is not the time for you to have parties every night and to ruin this property. This buyer is an equitable owner, or has equitable interest once they sign a contract. This property should look like it looked when that buyer came through and saw it. So, and I remember once I was selling a house that was renovated. It was totally renovated, beautiful house. It was I think it was in Cobbs Creek, or it was Overbrook. It was either Overbrook or Cobbs Creek. We go Monday morning for the settlement. We go in, about to go in and do the pre-settlement walkthrough. The neighbor comes on and says, "Hey, are y'all gonna still buy that house?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean? Are we still gonna buy it?" He said, "Oh, you don't know." I'm like, "Well, no, I don't know." We go in the house, open the door. Well, apparently the owner is an investor, and also the contractor. Well, he allowed his 19-year-old son to use it for the weekend. 19-year-old son had about 400 people over Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Police have been there. They shut it down Sunday night. They had beer all over the place. They drew all over the walls. They urinated in all the cabinets. In the closets. I guess when the bathroom was not available, you just urinated in the closets. They scratched up the hardwood floor. The cabinets in the kitchen were hanging. They literally played tic-tac-toe all over the walls. and you smell like urine. You smell like beer and urine. It was disgusting. And of course, you got used condoms all over upstairs in the bed, in the rooms. And my buyer said, first of all, it was disgusting. So I said, I'm gonna walk outside. We could talk outside because I'm gonna be sick. We call the agent. Agent says, well, you all need to move forward. We'll just clean everything up. And I said, you have lost your mind. My seller said, I will never buy this house. And so let your sellers know that the house should look the way it does when the person came in. Don't think that I'm a seller. Now I decide to hang on the chandeliers every night. But I don't care because I'm going to sell it. Make sure you keep it in the condition it's in, outside of just a normal wear and tear. Any questions or comments? Somebody
Brent,
must
there's
have
a question in
question.
the chat. Can
Yes.
the seller request the buyer to get city certification? I am a buyer agent, so what should I advise my buyer if I am in this situation?
Wait, so read that again, Matt.
Can the seller request the buyer to get city
Oh.
certification?
Yes.
I am the buyer agent, so what should I advise my buyer if I am in this situation?
It depends on how badly you want the property. Everything in a contract is negotiable. If it's a cash transaction or a lot of people want it and you want it in this marketplace, you almost have to, you may have to, if the seller told me to do a dance on Market Street, I probably would do that in order to get the property. Right now, you almost have to do whatever a seller said. I mean, yeah, I would do it if my buyer wants it. And other people I know, if this market is crazy. And so whatever we list, we get multiple offers. We just listed a duplex in Mount Airy on what, 4th of July. And on the 5th of July, we had 18 offers, and the highest was 100,000 more than what we listed it for. Cash as is. That's just market. Now, I do believe the market's going to soften a little bit. I do, and down in Florida, it's even worse. There's just no inventory. I don't even work with buyers. I tell buyers, just wait this one out. I'm not taking you out. There's no inventory, and you're going to compete with 100 different people. And if you're willing to pay more than the property's worth, willing to buy it as is, you're willing to close fast, then I'll work with you in cash, of course. But it's a tough market. It really is. But if I'm the buyer's agent and the seller's saying you need to do X in order for us to get the property, getting the city cert, I don't think that's asking too much. Now, if they're asking me to make all the, if they're repaired, if there are violations and I have to correct the violations, it depends on what the violations are and what the cost of what the costs to correct. I mean, if there are no violations, all I got to do to order the city cert, sure, I'll go on and order. You just order online. But if it's going to cost $10,000 of repair violations, I'm not repairing violations before I own the property. I don't believe in doing that. I don't think a buyer ought to be doing work to a house they don't own. I've been around long enough to see buyers go in and do stuff and the deal dies. Now what are you left with? The person you made repairs to someone's house, but now you don't own it. Now, do you get reimbursed for that? So just be mindful. I don't ever let my buyers make repairs to a house they don't own. My advice to them, don't do it if they want to. And just like I don't ever advise, and I know people will differ, I never want a seller to be able to stay in a house after closing. I will never do that. I know it happens in some circumstances, and some of you may have done it. I don't do it. Why? Because what if they don't leave? They're tenants. You write up they're supposed to be there 30 days or 15 days. They're tenants. They don't leave, you have to evict them. Right now, you can't even evict them. Or even if you could evict them, they take 3 or 4 months. Your buyer can't get in their house for 3 or 4 months because the seller didn't leave. I don't want, when at settlement, I want you out, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. Get out. You're not coming back in. I don't want you there for 1 night, 2 nights, no nights. You can drive by and wave, but you can never come back in that property. All right, any questions or comments? Nothing? You all bored? That's why you're not saying anything?
Trent, I just want to add, you're doing a great job. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Well, I like to hear from people. I'm tired too. I mean, I'm talking, doing all this talking. I figured somebody would have some questions. All right, let me keep
Definitely
going.
not bored, Trent.
What'd you say?
Definitely not bored at all. Thank you.
This is.
All right, so let's thank you all.
Trent,
All right, let's keep going then. Let's go on the night. Yes.
I do have a quick question on the condo docs. Like, I know you have 15 days within a date of execution, but are you able to get it before you actually, maybe not in this market, but are you able to get it before you
I think
submit
that's
an
great.
offer?
I think that's a great idea. If you know you're selling them, why not get them?
Yeah.
I actually think that's a great, I've sold a lot of condos in my days. I usually ask for condo docs from my seller when I said, have them to me when we list the property.
Right.
That way I can give them to you as soon as you give me an offer. I say, here are the condo docs, but then I have to order resale certificate. Yeah, you should do that stuff. I absolutely agree. Don't wait. You know you're selling the unit. Go on and you may as well have them available. I usually want them in my file or in my email. So if you submit an offer, or what I'll do, even if you're thinking about submitting an offer, I'll say, hey, you want to look at the condo docs? You want to review the condo docs? And they say, oh yeah. Because then they may say, based on what's in it, we're not going to bring it in an offer. Or they may say, okay, we had the issues, we had some questions, but we got an answer and we're going to submit an offer.
Right. Okay.
So that's an absolutely smart thing to do. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. One last question. How long does it take for the resale cert for you to get that?
It depends on the condo association.
Got it.
I've seen them take a week or 5 days. I've seen them take. Now, there's a law that requires them to get them to you within a certain amount of time. I don't know what it is, but the condo association is not, it's supposed, once they're ordered, they're supposed to have them, I don't know if it's like 15 days or something. There is a law that requires them to have it by a certain date. I don't know what it is, but I would say you'll get them probably 10 days, probably about 10 days. Some of them are, I would say the fastest I've ever had was like 3-4 days. And probably the longest was probably 10 days. I've never waited more than 10 days. Actually, I think, I probably never waited more than 10 days.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, go down to one of the home warranty. You understand home warranty? You just.
Hey, Trent, can I ask a question?
Yes.
I want to ask a question about an assessment on a condo. If you know that there is an assessment on a condo that you're going to be putting on the market, do you have to alert people on your listing?
Yeah, I'm glad you know, that's something I wanted to bring up. I'm glad you said that. That's a great question. If you are a condo owner, and even if you know that they're considering an increase in the condo fees and it hadn't happened and you're selling it, I believe you have an obligation to disclose that to a buyer, a potential buyer.
But what if it is not an assessment that raises your condo fees, but the person who owns the unit may have to pay, let's say, $25,000, maybe before selling? Do we have an obligation to
you will have, remember the resale certificate will say what is owed on that unit. The seller, remember that if the seller owes money, the seller has to pay that because it becomes a lien on the unit at settlement, either before or at settlement. So you can't sell a unit. I can't sell your unit and I owe the condo association $25,000. It can't happen because they will not give me clearance.
Sure.
Because there's a lien that unpaid condo fees or special assessments can become a lien at the condo association can impose a lien. So and that means you can't get clear title if the condo, if there's unpaid monies owing to the condo association, if they go unpaid at or before settlement, you're not going to get title, and which means you won't get a loan, or if you're paying cash, you'll be crazy to buy it with not being able to get title insurance.
Yeah, but let's imagine there is an assessment on the condo unit, but the seller is going to find a buyer, but they want to use the proceed of the sale to pay for that assessment. That assessment is going to get paid on the sheet at time of settlement.
That it doesn't matter when it gets paid, as long as it's paid at settlement or before settlement. That's it. Doesn't matter. If there's, you know, but yeah, it doesn't matter when it's paid. But also, I thought you were asking, but I want this point. If you know, let's say the condo association is going to impose they have a capital improvement fund or a capital assessment. Let's say they're gonna put a new roof.
Right.
And now everybody has to pay $5,000 a month, or have to pay, every unit has to pay $5,000. And even if they did not vote on it yet, but they are considering it because every meeting they're talking about it, if you're about to sell that condo, I believe you should disclose that the condo association is having talks about possibly assessing each unit owner $5,000 to cover the cost of a new roof. Because now you may have a buyer who buys it and says, if I knew this, I wouldn't have bought it. That's why I always believe over disclosure is better than under disclosure. You can never be in trouble because you disclose too much. I've never heard somebody say, oh my God, I'm so mad because you gave me too much information about this property. But I've had people come back and say, not to me, but to people, you didn't tell me enough, and therefore I'm filing a lawsuit.
Yeah, okay.
Disclose, over disclosure is always better than under disclosure.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions, comments? All right, take a look at, go down to page, go down to, well, look at 25C. This is something else that you see a lot of agents put in contracts when they ask for repairs. They'll say, what? Look at 25C. Any repairs required by this agreement will be completed in a workmanlike manner. Again, you don't have to say that we want this done, but it needs to be done in a workmanlike manner. The contract already says any work that the seller does or has done must be done in a professional manner. Workmanlike manner basically means in a professional manner. You can't get your 12-year-old son to patch up the roof, right? Even if he's a roofer, licensed roofer, all right?
Question.
All right. Yes.
Question. Yeah, I just want to go back to the mortgage contingency just to confirm my my thoughts. The an early inspection has no effect on the dates regarding the negotiation period or the acceptance or the non-acceptance periods. All those dates are they stay the same. It's not a ripple effect when that early inspection takes place.
No. So you're saying if you do the inspection in 5 days as opposed to 10, you don't lose those 5 days. You just have 10 days for the negotiation period as opposed to 5.
And
you
then
don't lose. You're not penalized because you did the home inspection in 5 days as opposed to 10 days. That wouldn't be fair, right? You have 10 days to do the home inspection. Now, once the negotiation is concluded, and let's say we do the home inspection in 5 days and we start negotiating with the seller says, okay, I'm gonna put a new roof, then it's over, then we're done. Because the seller and the buyer have already agreed to do any repairs or any credits. Then we finish.
Okay. So
right?
so
we don't
then
need it because now the negotiation period is concluded because the negotiations are over.
all right. So then the acceptance period kicks in. Then if that's 3 days or 2 days, then they're going to accept it. If maybe they still don't want it for whatever reason, then they what about those dates?
But you have wait, could ask that last question. You're talking about what now? The home inspection?
The negotiation period. Yeah, going on
what page is that? Go back. Let me go back. At page 14. Right?
Yep.
No,
It's
well, 13. 8. No, I'm sorry, page 8, right? No, what page are we talking?
Wait a minute. It's page starting with page 8, and then going into page 9, where we're dealing with the negotiation period, and then whether or not they want to accept it or reject it. So let's say now they did the inspection early. Now we're in the.
So go back to that question. Let's start with one. That the contingent A gives you, if you leave it blank, you have 10 days from the execution date to do your home inspection, okay? If you do the home inspection before 10 days, you don't lose those days. You just add them on to the negotiation period.
All right, so now let's go into all right, so you still have the full 10 days. So now let's go into the negotiation period.
Right.
Let's say we're in the eighth day of the 10, 8 of 10. We're at 8 of 10. We're still in the inspection period. So
Right.
now we're on day 8, we're negotiating. And then say we get the negotiations done in day 11.
Well, okay,
Let's say we get it done at day 10.
All right, but hold on, let me show you something because it may clear it up. Look at 3A. Look at what that language says. It says following the end of the contingency period. Buyer and seller will have 5 days for negotiation period. It's telling you following the end. You don't lose the contingency period is 10 days, period. You don't lose that simply because you did it early. You just basically, Perry, you can start the negotiation period early, but you still have 5 days plus whatever was left over from the contingency period.
Okay.
So if I did my home inspection in 5 days as opposed to 10, I have 5 days, and remember the negotiation period starts after the contingency period is over, right? So even if I start negotiations early, I still really it doesn't start counting until the contingency period is over. All I do is have more time to negotiate. That's all.
Okay, so beneficial to the buyer, benefiting the buyer with just more time.
It just gives the buyer more time. Absolutely.
And the other dates remain intact.
But then the last one is 2 days. Remember, right? But you still have 17 total days. Whether you do it early, you're not penalized. You just have more time. So if I do the negotiation, 10 days to do home inspection, 5 days for negotiation, and if we can't come to any resolution during that 15-day period, 15 days total, then we have 2 final days to decide whether or not the buyer, that is, whether or not the buyer is going to accept this property the way it is, or just terminate and walk away, get his or her earnest money deposit back.
Okay, I got it. I got the clarity. Thank you.
All right, good. Any other questions?
Can you hear me?
Now, someone asked about the workmanship. Workmanlike manner that you'll see is on paragraph 25C, line 686, where it says any repairs required by this agreement will be completed in a workmanlike fashion or manner. Did someone say something?
Yes, that was me. I normally write that in my RTIs, but I just kind of overlooked it in the AOS. I don't think I even saw that before. So thank you.
That's why you're here, right? That's why you're here. So that's good. Anytime people say they learned something, then it's worth it. It makes my day. It makes my day.
Thank you so much.
That's why we're here.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, let's get to 26, which is probably important. I know it's important.
4, 5.
Let me ask this. Is there a way, let me give a scenario. Buyer wakes up, today is the 10th of July. Buyer says, hey, now by the way, no, licensed professional, I would say professional. I don't know if professional doesn't have to be licensed. I don't believe, remember there is no definition of workmanlike, but it just needs to be done professionally. You can be, I would hire, if you want a licensed insured contractor, I would specify that, because you could have somebody go in and do work on a roof who's just a contractor who's not licensed. I would only hire a license, but general handyman is good enough. I would agree, as long as it's professionally done. That's what it says. It doesn't say anything about it having to be licensed and insured. But a handyman, a lot of handymen and women who are better than, who aren't licensed, but they're just as good as anyone else. And we use some of those people. Question. If the buyer wakes up this morning, what time is it? It's 10, it's 11, it is 11:40. And the buyer calls you and says, hey, I decided I don't want to buy that house in University City on Monday. Closes Monday morning. I don't want it. I know I'm in default, but is there a way I can get my $20,000 earnest money deposit back? I want my money back. Is there a way that that buyer can still get his or her money back?
Yes,
How?
anything. I mean, they can go in a house and find just
No,
something.
no, wait a minute. Wait,
No,
what I said?
no.
Wait, hold on. I said, listen to what I said, and I want you to answer this. It is Saturday at 11:40. Settlement is 9 o'clock on Monday. The house is brand new, so ain't gonna be no issues. Buyer just called you and said, I'm not even going to a pre-settlement walkthrough. I don't want this house because I decided I'm gonna move to Texas. I want my $20,000 back though. Is it Nadine Hodge? Can you please get my money back? Is there any way you can get that client's money back according to this contract?
It's a language, it's in the contract. Let me.
All right, well,
Out, out, and in. Out, out.
I said no.
Out. Out.
does anybody believe yes is the answer?
Out.
I
Yep.
do.
All right, let's look at
and
this.
down. Yep.
And the answer is
and down.
yes, there is a way
Yep.
you can get money back. Let's take a look at paragraph. Remember paragraph 26C. That's your key. 26C. We're talking now about 26 about default, termination, return, and deposit. It says, I want to just drop down to C. Well, let's go through A. Where buyer terminates his agreement.
Oh, I remember.
Where buyer terminates his agreement pursuant to any right granted by this agreement, buyer will be entitled to return of all deposit monies on account of purchase price, blah, blah, blah. Now, let me just drop. Let's just get to C. Well, let's look at B. B is important. Just keep in mind this. Anytime there is a dispute over the return of deposit monies, the broker can never determine who gets the money. Make sure you remember that. In order for the broker to release earnest money deposit back to a buyer when there's a dispute, look at B, 26B. It says, regardless of the apparent entitlement to deposit monies, Pennsylvania law does not allow a broker holding deposit monies to determine who is entitled to deposit monies when settlement does not occur. Broker can only release the money. There are only 4 certain scenarios. 1, if this agreement is terminated prior to settlement and there is no dispute over the entitlement to deposit monies, like that termination. I did a home inspection, don't like it, I'm terminating the contract, seller's not saying don't return the money, there is no dispute, broker can return the money. Number 2, if after the broker has received deposit monies, broker receives a written agreement that is signed by both the buyer and the seller directing how to distribute the money. Okay, in this situation, buyer puts down $20,000, buyer says, I don't want to buy the house. Seller and buyer may say, okay, give me $10,000, you can have $10,000. Okay, as long as we have an agreement, broker can then release that $10,000 in one party, $10,000 in the other. Number 3, according to the terms of a final order by the court. If a court says buyer's entitled to the money or the seller's entitled to the money, broker has to comply and give that money according to the final order of the court. And 4, this is where we're going to get into C. 4, according to the terms of a prior written agreement between the buyer and the seller that directs the buyer how to distribute the deposit money if there is a dispute between the parties that is not resolved. Okay, just so you know, a prior written agreement is what C is. 26C is what you would call a prior written agreement. That's buyer and seller agree in C as to what happens if there's a dispute. That is their prior written agreement. Take a look at C. this is important, chapter, paragraph. Buyer and seller agree that if there is a dispute over the entitlement to deposit monies that is unresolved, please don't leave 180 in there. Put 30, put 20, put 15. Do not leave half a year. Let's just put 30 for now. Put whatever you want. Do not put more than 30. I would put 15 or 20. Let's read it with 30. Buyer and seller agree that there is a dispute over the entitlement deposit monies that is unresolved 30 days after the settlement date or following termination of the agreement, whichever is earlier, then the broker holding deposit monies will, within 30 days of receipt of the buyer's written request, distribute the deposit money to the buyer unless the broker is in receipt of verifiable written notice that the dispute is the subject of litigation or mediation. Did you all get that? If I am in breach, I have breached the contract, I'm that buyer, I have breached it, it's clear I breached it. And the seller has not initiated, let's say 30 days. Within 30 days, the seller has not initiated mediation or litigation, and they have to do mediation first. Then I'm the buyer. I write a letter to the broker saying, return my deposit to me. The broker must return that deposit within 30 days. It does not matter that the buyer clearly breached the contract. Let me say that again. If there is a breach and the buyer sends a letter to the broker of that company requesting that his or her deposit monies be returned to him or her, if that broker receives that letter from that buyer and the seller has not initiated mediation or litigation at the time that that broker received that letter, that broker has 30 days to return that money to that buyer. Now, let me add this also. Even if the seller initiates mediation or litigation after the broker receives the money, they still must give it back to the buyer. So if at the time that broker receives that letter from that buyer requesting the money, they have 30 days, within the next 30 days, they have to give that money to the buyer, even if 10 days later, the seller initiates mediation. It's too late because it's all dependent upon the time that the broker receives a letter. Now, if the broker receives a letter from the buyer requesting the money back and the seller already initiated mediation, then the broker has to continue to hold the money until one of those four things happen.
Hey, Trent. Trent, real quickly, for the seller to initiate litigation or mediation, how do they have to do that? Does that have to be with a lawyer, or can they just write their own letter?
They can, well, mediation, you can call GPAR. Cheryl Adams is on. You can call Cheryl Adams and Cheryl will give you the forms because she's a director of professional standards. She will tell them what to do. And now we have proof that they initiated mediation.
Okay.
So that's all you need. Once I'm the broker and I know there's mediation, they can say, hey, I have something from Cheryl Adams at GPAR. Well, then I can't show the money. Or if they went to a lawyer and a lawyer's involved and a lawyer gives me a letter saying, hey, I've been retained by this person to, dispute over the entitlement to money, then I'm bound to keep that money in my escrow account until I'm told what to do with it.
Okay, so it does have to be done through a legal motion though. So either through GPAR or through a lawyer or.
Yeah, I mean, you have to do something. I mean, yeah.
You can't just write down on a piece of, on a napkin and say, I want litigation.
Right, it has, right. The seller can't say, I'm going to initiate mediation. Say, that's nice, but you have to show me proof.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right,
And
so it's almost like the attorney review period in New Jersey.
Does it need to be time allowed for seller to react, or can buyer submit notice of seller? Does there need to be time allowed for seller? No, the time is your 30 days. If you put in a contract 30 days, if the seller doesn't do something in those 30 days or whatever number of days you put in the contract, they don't have the right to dispute it. Now, here's the other thing. Now, I return that money to the buyer. But the buyer, let's look at one paragraph, another sentence that is also equally as important. Go to the bottom. Well, let's finish. It says, if the broker has received verifiable written notice of litigation or mediation prior to the receipt of buyer's request for distribution, broker will continue to hold the deposit monies until receipt of a written distribution agreement between the buyer and the seller or a final court order. Go down, skip the next line, and look at the other one. It says, buyer and seller agree that the distribution of deposit monies based on the passage of time does not legally determine entitlement to deposit monies, and that the parties maintain their legal rights to pursue litigation even after a distribution is made. So in other words, once I give that money to the buyer, the seller can still come back and sue for that money. Now, I can tell you this, if the deposit is 1 or 2,000, that ain't gonna happen. But 20, 30,000, it may happen.
Thank you for the refresher, Trent. I remember that's what, yeah.
All right, good.
But question.
Yes.
If the broker is going to distribute the funds and the letter was sent timely and there was no litigation or mediation, does the broker releasing the funds need the release form as to what the distribution amounts are going to be?
You're right. That's when you use a notice of the agreement of sale release and distribution of deposit monies, because then it will say exactly what, oh no, I'm saying, wait, I'm sorry. If they agree, you would sign that. But if they are if the broker is releasing to the buyer because that broker received a letter, then there's nothing signed. The broker just sends the money.
Okay,
because remember, the seller's not signing off. The seller doesn't have to, you don't go to the seller. You just simply send a check.
Off. Okay.
What was that?
Okay. I'm saying the seller probably, in all likelihood, would not sign.
The seller would never sign it. Of course not. You're right. The seller would never sign it. I mean, if I go to the seller and say, hey, that $20,000, the buyer breached the contract, that $20,000 they put down, oh, I want you to sign releasing it back to them. Seller said, are you crazy? So no, seller would not sign it.
So what protection would the broker have? I mean,
the broker has lots of protection. I'm gonna tell you, go back to page 13. I'm glad you asked. Look at D. That's a good question. Look at D. Buyer and seller agree that a broker who holds or distributes deposit monies pursuant to paragraph blah, 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 will not be liable. Buyer and seller agree that if any broker or affiliated licensee is named in litigation regarding deposit monies, the attorney's fees and costs of the broker and licensee will be paid by the party naming them in litigation. So whoever names you in litigation must pay your attorney's fees.
Can you tell us again which paragraph is this on?
What was that?
Can you tell us again, where did you see what you just read?
I read, that's paragraph 26D, 26D.
Okay.
All right, 26D. So if you name the broker in litigation, that broker is protected. You must pay the attorney's fees of that broker.
Hey, Trent.
Yes.
A quick question. Is this why it's safer as per the AOS that brokerages hold the deposit monies versus title companies because they're not upheld to the same standard?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that just happened to me. Yeah.
I don't think it's ever a good idea to have a title company or a lawyer hold deposit money.
Agreed.
Let the broker do it. Because remember, again, you're right. The title company and the title company lawyer this does not apply to them. This does not apply to a lawyer nor to a title company. I would rather have a broker holding it because I know exactly what that broker can and cannot do. I don't know what the title company can and cannot do, or the lawyer can and cannot do. But I know what the broker can and cannot do. I know what I can as a broker can and cannot do.
Got it.
All right.
Question, Trent. In that same scenario, if the listing broker refuses to release the funds or refund, is there a penalty or how can it be enforced?
Go to mediation. It has, the contract's clear. It has to be enforced. I mean, you should tell the broker, file a complaint with the board or something. I mean, the contract is clear. hire a lawyer and have a lawyer send a letter saying, hey, you need to release that money and make them pay the attorney's fees, because this is clear. This is not even vague. It's clear. If the buyer gives you a letter and at the time that you receive the letter, the seller has not initiated mediation or litigation, then within 30 days, you, Mr. or Mrs. Broker, must return the money. That is clear. So I don't know what broker, a lot of brokers didn't know this was here. And a lot of times, and I've been teaching this for a while, and brokers say, my God, I didn't know that. And it's funny because once somebody sent it to me, I'm like, how did they know that? And they said, I took one of your classes. I would have never known that. And I had about 3 people send me stuff because they said, I learned it from you. And I'm representing the seller. I said, darn, so, but you're fine. All right, let's finish up. Look at G.
Oh, well, I'm sorry, one more question. Now this letter that we're referring to, is that just, is this a handwritten letter?
That's
or
a
what
letter.
elements should be?
If I'm doing it, I would send a certified letter, because what if the broker says you never got it? There's no proof that you got it. Now, I had someone send me an email, a letter through email. I accepted it because I just said they sent me a letter. I could have said, send it to me about certain, but I accepted it. It was still a letter. They just emailed it. But I would, if I was advising a buyer, I would say, send a letter to the broker record by certified letter.
And what do you tell the buyer? You say you write a letter which contains return my refund or else, or what do you tell them?
I would tell them to quote, use the contract and say paragraph 26C says that if the seller has not received, at the time you receive my letter, the seller has not initiated mediation or litigation, then you must return my money. And I'm asking for the return of my money within 30 days, which means the buyer knows what's in his contract and the broker should return that money. If not, then that buyer, tell him go get a lawyer. You can't, the broker can't file a complaint against the broker, because the broker can't decide what the law is or decide. The contract's clear. If the broker is saying to you, I'm not going to do it, then I will file a complaint against the broker. All right, let's finish up. G, paragraph 26G says, if you represent the buyer, make sure you check that box. Seller is limited to retaining sums paid by the buyer, include deposit monies as liquidated damages. If you check that box, it means that if the buyer breaches the contract, the seller cannot keep more than what the deposit money is. The seller, if you put down 1,000 and you breach the contract, the seller cannot come after you for more than what what the buyer put down as an earnest money deposit. And this contract is over. They can never come back and sue you for additional money. Once they take your earnest money deposit as liquidated damages, that ends this case. This contract is void and it's over forever. All right. Mediation. Make sure your clients know, from paragraph 26, that buyer and seller will submit all disputes or claims that arise from this agreement, including disputes and claims over deposit monies, to mediation. And you see Cheryl. Is Cheryl still there? Cheryl Adams is wave Cheryl. Everybody knows Cheryl Adams. Cheryl is the director of professional standards. And so if you had an issue, if you wanted to file a claim, you'll call Cheryl and she will help you. So so sellers and buyers have disputes. They don't go to lawyers. They don't go to court. They have to go to mediation. So you're required to go to mediation according to this contract. Any dispute, bring it to mediation. Any ethics violations, bring it to mediation. You think the buyer violated code of ethics, or you think the seller violated code, or you think the agent violated code of ethics, then you still call Cheryl. All right.
You can't file a code of ethics on a buyer.
I'm sorry. Right. I'm sorry. Thank you, Cheryl. Anything else you want to correct me on?
No, not at this time.
Well, this is the only opportunity you get.
I got your number, Trent.
All right, go down to, 30. No, if buyer is 30, remember when you get the buyer, the law requires that within 3 days of making a loan application, buyer has to get a LE, what is LE? Lord, the close estimate, loan estimate. Within 3 days of making an application, law requires that the lender give the buyer a loan estimate, and within 3 days of closing, law requires that the title company give the buyer that CD or that closing disclosure. That has to be given to the buyer. A lot of times agents ask the title company, ask the lender or the title company, where I want to see the CD. The law is clear. The CD, that closing disclosure, has to go to the buyer. It does not come to you. It goes to the buyer. All right. But the buyer, this contract says a buyer must then turn it over to you. All right, because you do need to see what the numbers are. Take a look at 30. It says if buyer is obtaining mortgage financing, buyer shall promptly deliver to the broker for the buyer, if any, a copy of that loan estimate, that LE, and that closing disclosure, that CD, upon receipt, because the law is clear. The lender can't give you the loan estimate or the closing disclosure, but you're saying to the buyer, and when you get these, you must turn them over to me. All right, but the title company cannot give you a copy of the seller's closing disclosure. All right, I think that's all right. Let's go over to the end, the line 795, where it says buyer and seller acknowledge receipt of a copy of the agreement at the time of signing. I just want you all to realize agents make this mistake all the time. The Real Estate License Registration Act says that any time a buyer or seller signs anything, that buyer or seller must be given a copy of that document at the time that it's signed, not the next day, because if you do, you're in violation of Section 604 of the Real Estate License Registration Act. You must give, so if you're meeting a client outside of your office, take 2 copies, because anything they put their signature on and you don't give them a copy, you violate Section 604 of the Act. You must, at the time of signing, hand them a copy, or they can take, young people can take pictures on the phones. Oh, I can't do all that. So, if you're a millennial, you can do all kinds of stuff. You can put it in the cloud. I don't know how you get it from the cloud. I got a lot of stuff in the cloud. I don't know where it is. I figured I'll get it when I get to heaven. But give it, so just so make sure you give them a copy of stuff. All right, and look at this. Go down to make sure you have to have the buyer initial that they receive the consumer notice. Make sure they have a copy of consumer notice. You should have given them a copy of the estimated closing costs. You should, if it's a co-op, they should have a copy. They should receive a copy of the earnest money deposit. If you are a dual agent, you don't need a deposit money notice. That's only if there's a co-op, because if you're a dual agent, the money is going to be held by your broker. But if you're a co-op, it's going to be held by it's going to be held by the broker for the seller. And the law requires that the buyer know where his or her money is going to be held. Therefore, that deposit money notice is required. Also, you should have given your buyer that lead-based paint hazard disclosure. And on that note, I would say that's it, and it's exactly 12 o'clock.
Hey, Trent, did you explain paragraph 29, real estate recovery fund? When do we pay it into that? I don't remember paying in the real estate recovery fund.
I'll tell it real fast. Real estate recovery fund, everybody pays $10 into the real estate recovery fund at the time that they get their license. If the real estate recovery fund drops below 300,000, anything below 300, it has to always be at 500,000. If it drops below 300,000, then everybody with a license at the time of renewal will have to pay another $10.
Got it.
All right. Any other questions?
Hey, to our audience, I just want to
Thank
thank all of you for tuning in, your questions, the engagement, the involvement. Really, really rock solid stuff. As you can tell, everybody learning from each other. And Trent, great job.
Thank you.
Good job.
My second time, Trent.
Boom, 3 hours. Probably not enough time, right?
We could go longer. I have an 8-hour class for tomorrow at Temple, so 3 hours is nothing. Now I do
All right.
like to go eat some food. I'm hungry.
Thanks, Trent.
All right.
Trent, you just comments here. You are a rock star. All right, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thank you,
Enjoy
everyone.
yourself. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Trent.